Good morning, councillors. If you could take your seats, please, we'll get underway. Oh, is he just coming down the passage? Yeah. All right. Well, good morning, Your Worship, councillors. No mai haramai, welcome to our Strategy, Policy and Finance Committee meeting today, the 12th of October, 2017. Welcome also to our hard-working staff and our friendly media person as well. No mai haramai. And of course, don't forget we are streaming live. So to those watching from afar, welcome to our meeting this morning. Please remember to use your microphones and just pull them closer just so that we can hear clearly what's being said this morning, and particularly for those who are watching the live stream. So welcome this morning. We do apologies, please. Any apologies? Oh, Councillor Bentley, of course, yes. And yes, Mr. Berriman-Kemp.
Oh, yes, through you, Mayor and Chair, an apology for lateness for Gina Mohi. She is on the way.
Oh,
in fact, she's so on the way, she's walking
she's
in
so
now.
on the way, she's nearly here. Thank you. As is Councillor Stewart making his way here as well. Well, thank you very much. So may I have a mover and a seconder, please, that Councillor Bentley's apology be accepted. Thank you, Councillor Gould. Thank you, Councillor Kent. All those in favour, please say aye. Carried. Thank you. Any declarations of interest this morning, please? Carl, thank you. Any urgent items not on the agenda that want to be? No, thank you. Thank you very much. Item 4, confirmation of our minutes. Minutes of the Strategy, Policy and Finance Committee meeting held on the 14th of September 2017. May I have a mover and a seconder, please? Thank you. Shirley, Sorry, I'll get that. Sorry, I'm just going to have a trumper. I used to want to say trooper. Thank you, Mrs. Trumper. Thank you, and thank you, Councillor Gould. So that those minutes be confirmed as true and correct. Any discussion? All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, thank you. We move now to our staff reports, and as you can see, we've got. I think it's going to be a really interesting discussion. We're going to have some really interesting discussions this morning, and we've got a lot to get through. But I think with focus and being, with focused discussion this morning, I think we can get through pretty smartly. Our lunch is set down for 12:30, and I see no reason why we shouldn't be able to actually conclude at lunchtime. But however, it's entirely up to the discussion this morning. So we'll move to item number 5, our staff reports, and the first one is on page 13. May I have a mover and a seconder, please, to receive the report, review of policy register, and it's been moved by Her Worship, seconded by Councillor Gould. I'll put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Thank you very much. Good morning, Una. You're going to present an overview.
I am. Good morning, members. Just to say, you will have all heard me in our LTP forums to date talking about a number of things that are part of our LTP preparation checklist and items that will be brought back to you over time. The report that you have in front of you today is one such item, and it's the review of the policy register. So leading into an LTP preparation, it is seen as good practice for us to go through our policy register and just make sure that those policies, that none of them are now redundant. Have they been superseded by another strategy or another piece of legislation? Do they still align with our Vision 2030 and our other existing plans and strategies? And are there those that need to be updated and need to be refreshed and brought back through to you? So that review has been undertaken, and you'll see in the schedules that have been presented, those policies have been grouped up to give you an idea of where those policies are sitting in terms of those that still need a review and will be coming back to you, and those that have been deleted or amended. And as the attachments there are a couple of policies there with just slight amendments to the wording in that for you today. If there's any questions, I can take those.
Yes, thank you, Una. Yes, Your Worship.
Thank you, Una. Just the links with council-controlled organisations, how do we see those reflected? Because they'll have their own policies, won't they, that they'll be updating, that aren't held by the parent group?
That's correct, yes.
So how do we know about the links of when their policies are going to be updated? Or is that something we don't even worry about?
It's something we don't need to worry about.
Okay, so there's nothing there that has to be reflected back through audit and risk?
That I'm aware of.
However, I think that's a good question, Your Worship, and I just wondered if at least we should have some idea of what their policies are, and that we should be given some assurance that they will be reviewed from time to time. So I think that's a really good point that's been raised. Otherwise, we could be setting ourselves up.
That's right, and it just raises the issue through the statement of intent. If you wanted to change a direction as elected members for the CCO, where can we do that, or where can we recommend that this needs to be examined?
Thank you. JP.
Madam Chair, it's actually a very good point, and for a number of times we've treated, and a number of the CCOs have in the past simply adopted a number of our policies directly across. So I think one of the things that we need to do with this update is just go back to those chief executives and those boards and just make sure that we have got either our updates recognised in their adopted policies, or if there's any that are of particular importance to us that we feel they need to make sure they adhere to, we can include those in those letters of expectation. So we'll go away and just have those conversations with the CEs at this stage about what we've done to update the policies.
Thank you, JP. Yes, no, sorry. Councillor Gould.
Yeah, through Madam Chair, where it has been consented as a commercial, there's also a decision that's often made about whether a meter needs to be installed. So there is a decision about whether there's a volumetric reasoning. So if it was say a B&B or something like that, then they may be changed over to a meter and charged volumetrically. But again, it's a decision that's made by the staff about the scale of the operation involved as to whether that's appropriate.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Kent.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd just like to raise the question of the percent per hour policy. I notice here that it was adopted on the 30th of June 2016, but it's not up for review until 2021, and I think it would actually be rather appropriate if this council actually reviewed that policy to see whether it was appropriate in terms of the long-term plan.
Which one are you talking about, Councillor Kent?
The percent per hour policy.
Oh, wait a minute.
2.4 on page 16. I believe that this council should actually make that decision, not the previous one.
And I'll just jump in there.
Thank you.
Yes, we can do that. So those dates, I guess, were just put down as a rolling review. So it is the minimum sort of 3 years that, yes, we need to check ourselves. But at the request of yourselves, that review can be done at any time and in line with this LTP process.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Stewart?
Thank you. Apologies for being late. On page 16, there is under 1.1, it says dangerous and unsanitary buildings policy. We're going to update that on the 1st of the 12th. Before I make comment on that, Una, how realistic is it for all those policies to be updated by the 1st of December this year? I know in my own area in sport and recreation that Rob and the team have got a number of them underway, but the reality of them coming back to council by that date, whilst it is a lofty goal, how realistic is that? And just one specific question on the dangerous and unsanitary buildings policy, required update is the 1st of the 12th 17. That would have to be quite a flexible policy, JP Una, because of the alterations to the current Building Act, and because that policy has to be very robust because of the implications and some of the actions that we've taken recently with buildings that are considered dangerous or unsanitary. So I just wondered whether the Building Act is the founding document, if you like, particularly for that policy, and is that being worked on currently, please?
So two things there. I'll answer the easier one off first. In terms of the those policies listed around sports and recreation, yes, there are a number of them there with the date of the 1st to the 12th. That is probably more likely to be a start point for review rather than the date that they will come back to you. Yes, it would be unrealistic to bring all of those policies to you before December. And in light, I suppose, of work within the Sports and Recreation Department, they need to get through that process first and then look at the policies and how they align with their current work programs and with the Vision 2030. The reason we've put that date and sort of grouped them all together is you'll see that a lot of those policies there have dates that are well sort of overdue in terms of our usual review period, and so it was more of to group them together as a trigger that these policies do need the review commenced.
Thank you.
Dangerous and insanitary buildings, I might defer to the front table.
Thank you. Councillor Donaldson. Oh, sorry, I beg your pardon. Yes. I thought you were wanting another question. Thank you.
No, the question was regarding the dangerous and sanitary buildings policy. Is the Building Act the founding document for that, and is that currently being worked on in view of events that have occurred in the last 3 or 4 months where we've needed to have a robust policy there because as you know, JP, you've got to have your I's dotted and your T's crossed in terms of going to court. So I just wondered, what was the urgency with that, and is that being worked on at the moment, please?
I'll have to come back to you on that one, Councillor. I'm just not familiar with the detail, and yeah, I can do that over the next few days.
Your Worship, you've got a comment to make there?
Supplementary to that, Henry, when there is a new government, it's very important that we raise again the derelict building and the amendment that we've done, which didn't get into a clause for an upgrade of the Building Act. It's just lapsed for lack of interest, really, and yet that is a very important issue for us here, and we gave the proposed amendment. So in the omnibus bill, that didn't get put forward, and I think we need to be proactive with government again about the Department of Building and Housing and the upgrade, the review of the Building Act, about getting that before their eyes again, the new government.
And thank you, Madam Mayor. And Darryl downstairs is working with MB at the moment on those issues, so he's carrying on those conversations.
Thank you for that explanation. Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I had the same question as Councillor Stewart regarding all those rollovers looking or, targeted for the 1st of December this year. However, there's one in particular that I've got a question about, and that is on page 16, the appointment and remuneration of directors for CCOs, last reviewed at a future date, and I just wonder when we did that. You've got the 1st of July 2019, they were last reviewed and adopted, and I wonder how long it's been since we've reviewed their remuneration, etc.
I'll have to go back and check on that one, and that's obviously a typo.
And supplementary to that, just the process for that one, will that go through a reference group like the Economic Development Advisory Group, or that change of policy? I mean, I was tackled about this policy in terms of director appointments just at the library the other day, so I think it is timely we look at them.
Just, to answer off that question, the answer is yes. I think we do need to use EDAG as a leading discussion point on that, and also talk to the two CCO boards about their reflections on how that's been for them attracting the appropriate skilled representatives to serve on those boards as well. You know, we've been very lucky in the past that even with probably nationally quite low levels of remuneration, we've been quite successful in filling those appointments, but it's worth looking again at that policy. Councillors, again, I suppose that highlights that there is a process involved in a lot of these, so even though we've got that start date kicking off, each of them will go through a number of steps, either checking legislation, going back to the relevant reference groups or CCOs or other interest stakeholders before it comes to a committee for any sort of amendments or discussion.
Councillor Maxwell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My query is around number 5.14. That's on the Wood First policy. I see where we're going to get an update by December this year. Just a query through to Una. Many people in our community, they think that when new buildings or new structures like the one in Hemo Gorge and all that should be wood first and all that, and council should do that. But that's not our role, is it? I mean, we can encourage and all that, but we can't tell people what they put up there. So are you able to sort of verify that for me?
That's correct, yes. We can't tell people to make their buildings all out of wood, but our policy is there to encourage the use of it.
Well, I don't think it's necessary, is it? Thank you.
Used,
Right.
not about the carving at all. There's been a conference here that we sponsored on wood innovation, and Bryce Hurd is now a rural board member. So I wonder if Bryce could be involved, along with John Stoolin, who ran that conference about the upgrade of the Wood First policy and the next step for Rotorua. There was some very exciting thinking there on innovation, and I think that will help us refresh that policy.
Thank you. Ms Mohi?
Oh, kia ora tātou. Firstly, apologies for being late this morning. Just wanting to pick up on the water metering policy, metered water supply policy, page 25. So I just note that in the spatial plan, building supporting infrastructure, there's a note talking about limited water capacity, particularly around the northwestern side of the lake. So I'm sort of surprised that we have crossed out a lot of the what I would consider incentives for water conservation in our district, and I'm quite curious as to why those were crossed out, and whether we can sort of reconsider that. I guess where I'm going to with that is just in terms of, the water conservation strategy it ties into the wastewater plant, it ties into the ability to grow, the capacity of the growth of Rotorua, and then we have a policy that's that's crossed out what I would consider really strong motivations to get us all as users of this water to pull back. That's a great behaviour mechanism, is hitting you in the pocket. As I understand it, we're probably one of the last councils left in the country that don't meter in the urban fence residential homes. I understand Tauranga had some major positive influences when they started metering, and it's saved them actually quite a bit of money in the long run. So I'm really interested in having a discussion around that.
I think some of the discussion that we have had is actually about being around the cost to install the metering equipment, but I'm not sure whether. JP, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I just might need Stavros just to chip in on this one as well. Madam Chair, this policy has just been updated now to, in effect, reflect the decisions we made during the recent bylaw review. So where we removed the requirement for new suburbs to have meters installed, that's been removed from that bylaw. So we've been through that process to adjust that. So the wording in here at this stage removes that requirement. And I think Mr. Michael spoke during that discussion about some of the problems we had with the network and water coming into the network before, almost needing to address those before we looked at volumetric charging as a mechanism for reducing costs. So maybe I can just refer that back to Stavros to answer off if there's anything more to add to that.
Morning, through you, Madam Chair. I think obviously water conservation policies is it's a basic principle we need to continue to follow. I think what JP outlined here, this policy review here, is just to tidy up the fact that we do not have a water metering policy, and therefore the installation of through a bylaw water meter is not consistent with the absence of that kind of policy. At a broader scale too, and we will discuss it during our workshop the 24th of October with regards to our infrastructure strategy. The question arises as to having been cognizant of the number of areas we can address to an actual water conservation or issues, what is the most highest priority. And I would just very briefly say that at the moment our public network loses somewhere in the region of 25% of the water through leaks. We also have a significant high inflow and infiltration. And therefore, before we think about the installation of water meters, perhaps our resources should be best prioritized to address the leakage, to address education programs, to address inflow and infiltration, and then at a later stage you consider water metering. At this point in time, probably is not the right time.
Kia ora.
Yes, Your Worship.
Chair, I totally accept what Stavros is saying, but I think where we're coming from a climate change perspective and a sustainability perspective, this council hasn't had that bigger discussion about water metering, and we're not going to in this till 2021. So I would suggest that we bring that forward to some time in this term of this council. I agree with you about the leakage and the infrastructure investment for a good network. And a resilient network, but that discussion should be held this term.
Kia ora. Just to finish off, sorry. So, yeah, I understand, totally agree with that assessment and that prioritising. Although I would like to just suggest that if we're not going to go there at this point, that maybe having a think about some other incentives. So particularly we had a comment raised by one of our board around grey water recycling, separating the uses of water. I understand it's Building Act, stuff, but if there's anything that the council is able to do in terms of incentivising developers to give that serious consideration when they're, particularly the big subdivision buildings, just putting that out there. And I think the last thing was, quite familiar with how the process of valuing the metering process and how they get to these costings, but what is glaringly obvious in that process is that there is no fiscal value attributed to water, and so of course it always looks too dear. So I just wonder, again, I think ethically there's that sort of gap there around how we value water in terms of a balance sheet value, so just wanted to highlight that too. So kia ora.
Thank you. Mr. Berryman-Kemp.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the report. I've got just a couple of questions which I wanted to run through, and in fact listening to some of the kōrero thus far reinforces my first one, because whilst I accept that operationally I assume that there's a policy review work plan, I'm sensing councillors and these committee members would be keen to know what's the plan to review these policies. We've already had some change in timings. One of the things that I wanted to add is having a look at them. I don't see an awful lot of amendment in terms of some of the new things which have come in, bilingual Rotorua, the partnership agreement, the community boards. We've already discussed whether or not climate change needs to be considered. So 2 questions. Number 1, is there a all-encompassing work plan for the review of policies? And supplementary to that, with the appointment of Gina Adangi, will she be involved in that work plan?
There is an encompassing work program. Our view is the policy reviews are an ongoing, they're a rolling cycle. Now that this has been refreshed, that rolling cycle will be updated, and when Gina is on board, she will be involved in the creation of the new policies that you have made reference to.
Mr. Thomas?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, I just wanted to support Mrs. Mohi and her comments around the water metering, and also support the Mayor and her suggestion that this policy be reviewed this term. I know water metering is a difficult thing for councils. It's often not popular with the public, but sustainability and climate change, I think, behoves us to actually review this policy.
Thank you. Yes, behoves us to start taking some action and putting some plans in place. Thank you. Councillor Tapsell?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Una, for yeah, not a missus yet. So there is something I did want to bring up, and it's actually something that's not in here that I'm very surprised that isn't, and it's something that's really important to me, and that's our young people. Now, councillors may recall in February this year, we made the decision, and we made a council resolution to cease operating the Rotorua Youth Council. And we only made that decision because we were told that it would be replaced by a strategic youth plan and also a staff member, 0.5 FTE, to pursue that and also form good relationships with community and other youth workers to ensure this is successful. Now, the community feedback from that it's almost been an entire year and we haven't had any action on the ground. The community doesn't know what's happening. The young people don't know what's happening. Now, the Youth Council was an excellent opportunity, but it's not only that I'm concerned about. I'm concerned about a growing trend of getting rid of policies and strategies that actually contribute to our people. Now, in all fairness, yes, it's fine. We do focus on infrastructure. That's our core service to the community, but there's no point having good infrastructure if we don't have happy people, if we don't have any people here. So not only would I like to raise the question on what is happening with that youth strategy and when will we see some action, but I also want to raise on page 18 the recommendation here to delete the older persons policy, which is replaced by the people portfolio. Now, with all due respect to the portfolios, I'm very reluctant to start deleting important policies like the older persons policy and the arts and cultural policy unless we have in hand on this paper what we're going to be replacing it with. Otherwise, we run the risk of what we've just seen with ceasing the Youth Council on, well, there's actually been nothing, and it kind of goes under the mat and we forget about it. So if I could please have a response by either Una or the executive on what's going to happen with that, and make the suggestion that we do have a report about what's going on going forward for the Youth Council or Youth Strategy, and also suggest that we maintain older persons in arts and cultural policy until we have something that will replace it.
Thank you very much, Councillor Tapsell, for those good comments.
Madam Chair, there's quite a few facets to that question, so I'll start with the youth policy discussion first. Councillor Tapsell's right. It has been a year since we made the decision that we weren't going to continue with the Youth Council the way it was put forward, at which point that freed up a 0.5 of an FTE. We had been out to the various youth services groups about whether they would take up that offer of the funding of that 0.5. There'd been a number of discussions with those groups, and after protracted discussions, they actually put it back to council to say, actually, we'd prefer you to be the employer of that 0.5. So we're in a process of looking at that. So we were just about to advertise, but since then we've actually got into further conversations with the Youth Centre Trust and Te Wairiki Puria about creating a youth services strategy or a youth services plan moving forward. So looking at partnering around where we go with youth services, and that would also include that sort of youth policy aspect. So, Madam Chair, that sort of is more of a complicated answer, but again, it's us looking to work in partnership with groups to form the right kind of strategies or policies for this organisation. So that's been led out of the strategy group, so Rosemary Viskovich is leading in that space. So we are trying to move through with that, and both of those trusts are being quite supportive of that sort of approach. So that's where we're up to on that one. As far as some of those other policies are concerned, some of those policies were actually in place in lieu of strategies. So if you take, for example, the arts policy, that's actually has been replaced by some of the objectives that we've identified through the creative strategy. So actually we in a way, we should probably in this report have married up a case of saying, look, this is what the policy was and the gap it filled, and this is now the strategy that sort of superseded or replaced it, and are we covering those off? So again, councillors may be picking up on the conversations that have been had around the table. As we go through and just say, look, these are the ones we're proposing to delete, we should just be quite clear about what it's been replaced with, and is that adequate to cover off those issues, because I think that's obviously what the core of your question. So we can identify if that's happening, and so we can come back and just check on that. Probably the subsequent one, and again it goes back to the water metering, whether there's an earlier review date. From what Mr Michaels was saying, is that we wanted to take into the conversation in the next forum, or one of the forums around the LTP, what's our infrastructure strategy? So what are we looking at doing in the way of investment around some of that core infrastructure, particularly around water, which then leads on to, so what policies are right to support that? So that gives us the chance to use those forums to start guiding where we go with some of those policy actions. I think I've covered off most of those requests. So the youth policy one has been covered, and we just need to be clear about something like the older person's policy. How is it being covered off in regard to the current portfolio actions?
Thank you for your answer and your reassurance, but I'm still not satisfied that's I'm not confident enough to retract my suggestion of keeping those two in there until we do see it, and that's purely because while we trust your word as councillors and being good governance, we really do need to see what is there. And if I can actually perhaps make the suggestion that at the next SPNF meeting we do get a report back on what's happening with the youth policy, only because of the time that that has lapsed in the meantime with nothing happening. So I will take the chair's lead.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Tapsell. I do know enough. It's not that everything sort of just went off the scene at the beginning of the year, because I do know a number of youth organisations have collaboratively worked together on a number of projects in a number of areas. But your point is well taken. If something is deleted, that you want to know then what is going to replace it, and when. And that's the other thing, and when. So thank you for that. We've still got a ways to go with people wanting to speak. Councillor Hunt.
Thank you. It was really just a comment about the difference between the arts and cultural policy being replaced by the creative. Essentially, we've gone from an inert policy that people had one opportunity about 5 years ago to have a say in, to a living document, which is the strategy. And so that means that groups are called at various times, and this maintains the contact with the community. So I do understand it's not clear here. It just looks like it's being dumped, and I appreciate that a little bit of dialogue about that. But I think for those people involved, and some were involved in the creation of the original policy, the activity and the consultation, their ability to be involved in the creative strategy far outweighs that inert document that was simply done and then put in a drawer and occasionally referenced. These are living documents, these portfolios, they get updated, they get refreshed, and people get involved. But I certainly support your other comments.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Kent.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I support Councillor Tapsell's reservations with the deletion of a number of policies here. And looking at them, I question the legality of when Council has actually made a formal resolution to adopt a policy, whether you can just say it's deleted without giving a proper explanation, proper reasons, and a very detailed explanation as to what it's been replaced by. And I'll give a couple of specific examples here. You've got the financial contributions policy included in the district plan as an excuse. That is totally unsatisfactory. 1.1 here, appointment of directors to Rotorua Regional Airport policy, just to be deleted. It's covered in 1.2. Well, 1.2 is the dog policy. So I think some more work needs to go on these. I think perhaps we should defer the deletions until we get a proper report back.
Yes, Worship.
Look, our full council has endorsed the creative strategy, the recreation and sports strategy, the people strategy. We have endorsed those as a full council. So we've moved away from sort of deep dive individual policies to bringing them into a whole strategy. I think we're forgetting that. I understand where you're coming from about looking at the operational reports where we get regular updates on what's happening, but policy doesn't necessarily drive the methodology of council. Our overarching strategies were hugely comprehensive and involved community groups, such as Councillor Hunt said about the creative strategy, sports and rec. There were lots and lots of people involved in these. So I think it's a little bit like when you see this, we think we've lost it, but actually in the operational report, we're constantly getting updates on aspects of our strategies. We're sort of forgetting where they fit in this. I agree nothing should be dropped off unless it's very clear where it now sits. That's probably the bit that councillors are looking at, saying it's lost rather than it's now included in an overarching strategy.
I agree with you, Your Worship. A lot of these have been included in the overarching strategy, and it really makes them to a certain extent redundant. But I think perhaps the explanation might have been a little bit better. I think that would have been more helpful. Your Worship,
Madam
I did
Chair,
have... Sorry,
but,
I beg your pardon.
Please, because that was supposedly an explanation, an answer to what I was saying. I don't agree with that. I mean, for example, you've got here an older person's policy replaced by the people portfolio. Well, if the council had a policy on older people, why are we suddenly just handing it on a plate to one person who's in charge of a portfolio? That's not acceptable.
JP, you better speak about the people.
Through Madam Chair, I think one of the challenges we've got with something like the older person's policy, and some of our policies have been written in lieu of strategies. So they tended to identify some quite high level objectives, which generally are picked up in other areas. So without sort of being able to reference directly to the older person's policy, it's not just one person, it's not the portfolio lead, it's also the reference groups and the other reference groups we have that work into that. So I suppose as Councillor Hunt made the comment, it's not a policy that says thou shalt. It's more of a case of we've got the actions and the networks that are creating that kind of value. I do accept, though, councillors, and I think it's an important point you've made, is just to be really clear about where and why things have moved across, and potentially we should have spent a bit more detail on that. The only problem with that is it's how long do you actually create this report? So something like the references there to revenue and financing policy, we could have attached all of those, but you'll be working through those and you'll see a new revenue and financing policy come through the LTP process. So that's why those ones have been identified as coming together. So as a deletion. Financial contributions, we could have given you the relevant sections out of the district plan to identify where those have been recognised, but also to highlight that the RMA amendments that have gone through recently are actually removing financial contributions from the council's options. So that's one of the reasons why we've got a conversation coming around development contributions coming back to replace financial contributions that we won't be able to continue with. So there is actually some quite long explanations around each of those, but maybe it's a case of signalling where not only those reviews are going, but we should also make sure as we're coming back and just giving you updates on where some of these deletions have gone to, just to make sure you're comfortable with the reasoning behind what the policy previously said and where it's been covered off, so we can actually add those into some of that information that comes back through these reports over the next few months, if that satisfies those issues.
You, Councillor King.
Well, if I can just respond to that, you quoted there, for example, the revenue and financing policy and said that's included in the long-term plan. Sorry, it's the other way round. The long-term plan should be following our revenue and financing policy. So you can't just say the one that's dependent suddenly takes over from it.
Councillor, what I was saying there is that you, through the forums, are going to be putting together a new policy which will be included for public consultation through the LTP process, which brings together all of those elements. So that's why those current policies are being pulled together and made into the single documentation to go into the LTP. So I'm looking across at Thomas, who gave me a nod. So unless he wants to add anything to that, that's kind of the explanation. So, Councillor, apologies for the word. So we should have probably said in that case, deleted the current policies, reviewed in a context of the LTP process. Might have been more complete.
Thank you. Councillor Stewart.
I think we're getting a little bit carried away here. I mean, what this report is a work stream update. However, there are a number of aspects that I'm a little bit concerned about. I mean, we were given this Appendix 1 today, and that exactly shows us the process that we go with devolving or determining whether a property asset should be considered for disposal. But likewise, we should also be having a policy for the purchase of strategic properties as well. And I noticed that land acquisition policy, it just states each acquisition has individual decisions taken to council. Well, for me, that's not good enough. This is good enough because I can see and I can say to members of the public, that's how transparent it is. It's open and it's done properly. I think we need a policy in terms of land acquisitions regarding the criteria. You've got the criteria, you've got the delegations, you've got the parameters of a purchase. And I acknowledge that it has to come back to council, but there should still be a work stream document stating what the process is, and just not a flippant thing saying each acquisition case and individual decisions taken to council. The other thing is, I have to agree with Councillor Tapsell in terms of the use policy. I just wondered who was driving that, JP, so that's a specific question. But I also did want to point out that each of these work streams under sports and recreation, the current policies have implications for the LTP. I don't want to see, because we're deleting policies, that work stream or the work that's been done in those areas that have been deleted are going to fall off the radar. Because under sport and recreation 4.1 to 4.1, each and every one of those will have implications for the LTP, because most of them are core services or infrastructure, as Councillor Tapsell said. So I know that our staff are working diligently on those 8 areas for inclusion in the LTP, and that will come through the forums. So I just wondered, JP, I'm a little bit concerned that we are deleting things, but there's not a way ahead. This is absolutely ideal because it fits in with the policy that's here. The other thing is, I just wanted to assist our new member that under the metered water supply policy, the 6th dot, it says that a regular evaluation of metering and charging at the metered rate for domestic properties within the urban area will be undertaken. So it's not as though we've closed the door on looking at that in the future, because I believe Her Worship raised a very good point in that sustainability issues, and we don't want to go down a path that Tauranga had, where they had to put it in because they couldn't get a supply. So I think that's that needs to be highlighted. And the property disposal document on page 31, that's what I'm expecting. That's what I'm expecting from a policy, plus the flow chart showing us how things are done. So I think we need a land acquisition thing similar to this, and so that we don't get bogged down in buying a whole lot of so-called strategic assets which contribute to our debt, because our debt is where it is because we had to buy certain assets on Victoria Street and other issues in Western Road, etc., which we're in the process of disposing of at the moment. But I believe that is as important as the youth policy is. Any land acquisition policy must be transparent and open. So I'm a little bit concerned that we're deleting things, like Councillor Kent said, where there's no real way ahead.
Thank you. You've raised quite a number of issues, and I'd like to give officers an opportunity to respond.
Yeah,
First, may I ask Una, I saw you wanting to say a few things. Thank you, Una.
Just in reference to the sports and recreation policies, none of those are there down for deletion. They are on the schedule currently seeking a resolution from you stating there is no change but signalling a review date. So that will then go back and be worked through with the department, or the department working on themselves, about the review of those policies, and we will get some we will be getting a steer from the department as to when those policies will be in a position to come back here for that completion of that review process. Can I also suggest, and taking on board the comments that have been made around the deletions part, is that the policies listed on the deletion list currently are those that have been put on here as a recommendation from officers that these ones be deleted, and needed a resolution from yourselves today to do so. In light of the conversation that's been held, I suggest that we hold that part of the resolution today, and that we bring back to you the a more in-depth summary and flow from the policy that is suggested for deletion, and how that then has merged or been replaced by the strategy and that type of stuff. And then just tempering, I suppose, expectations on that in light of all of the work that is currently underway with the LTP. I wouldn't be able to guarantee bringing that deletions list back to you for the next SPNF, but would aim to do so by the end of the calendar year.
Thank you, Una. I think that would be helpful. JP?
Madam Chair, I suppose just reassuring Councillor Sturt too, that part of those forum discussions about the work programs around each of those elements is absolutely correct. And it's a bit like the conversation we kicked off with the infrastructure strategy as well, that there's a number of decisions or recommendations that will come out of those forums going into the LTP, which will help us finalise and shape those policies. So that's quite an important step in this process. As far as, and I suppose just picking up on what Una has suggested, I was just jotting down an amendment to the recommendation up there, which if I could share that, maybe it might just give you some reassurance as a way forward that follows on. So I suppose what I had changed there, that the committee recommends to Council to approve the review of the policy register, including the changes to existing policies, and that council policies, including deletion of policies, is programmed within the SPNF for review. So that way you get a chance to systematically see those policies as you've talked about, which is the disposal policy coming up and the reasons behind it, and the flow charts or the replacement policy, but equally within those reports we would also come up. So it just changes the end there to say, including changes to existing policies, and that council policies, including deletion of policies, is programmed within the SPNF
Oh, that'd be good.
committee for review. So that way you see each one coming up, including those deletion ones. So we actually become quite systematic about saying, do we need a policy? This is why it's been replaced, and this is how it's being replaced, as well as putting in place those new policies. Yeah.
Thank you. That seems a good way forward.
Madam Chair, can I
Thank
just
you. No, I've
comment on that, please?
Yes, I just want to move through what I've currently got here. Councillor Donaldson, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, look, if Councillor Stewart's moving it, I'll second it because it aligns with roughly what I was going to say. I'm pretty happy with JP's answer to Councillor Kent, and you know, one of the policies for deletion that he singled out, the appointment of directors, the Rotorua Regional Airport policy, is folded in to the remuneration and appointment for all the CCOs. So I think the appropriate time, as you do with legislation, is when you bring the new policy up that's been reviewed, you say this policy replaces, supersedes, and that policy is therefore deleted. Yeah. But I do also want to come back to the metered water supply one and Stavros's response. Like, I support the comments of Ms Mohi and her worship. What I'd just like to see is that next review date of 1 June 2021 struck out of that going forward, because and I really would like Stavros's presentation to Zone 2 brought to councillors or to this committee, because you know we're going through this process in terms of all our partnership around all our water infrastructure. I accept what he says about the infrastructure plan, the 30-year infrastructure plan, as being perhaps an opportune time, but also if that one of those partnerships should come to fruition, then that's possibly also a time to look at metering, because one of the aspects of metering is, while we have wastage in our network, the water meter at your own property shows you if you have wastage on your side of the meter. So it's a tool for that purpose, and therefore for water conservation, and not just there as an incentivised tool for water conservation. It lets you know if you've got a leak, you know, on your own property. So I see it as useful in that way. And it's always been the capital cost that's deterred us from going down this path. But if we get into one of these partnerships, then that may be something that we can move ahead with at greater pace than 1 June 2021. So, you know, I think next review should be either as part of LTP or 30-year infrastructure plan, or as soon as practicable might be best.
Thank you, Councillor Donaldson. I just wonder if we could have that presentation, Stavros's presentation that he gave to Zone 2, if we could have that at some stage for the benefit of all the councillors. You know, I think that would be, we could put that on perhaps the next, our next month's agenda. That would be very helpful. Just a few more to go. Councillor, Mrs Mohi.
Kia ora no. Just wanting to raise, I guess it would sit under the Compliance and Consent Solutions policy register, the lack of a iwi consultation committee policy. That's a bit of a gap there in my view. I understand that that was put to bed through the Taro Standing Committee process. So just probably highlighting that in the RMA committee process, I've asked for a review from planning as to where that process is at, how they're engaging with tangata whenua, and whether that current process is in alignment with the RMA, and is it best practice in its current form. And I guess the question is, does that require, if the report shows that there is a need for a reassessment or a reinstallation of some process, does that also require a policy to support that?
Thank you, Ms Mohi.
Madam Chair, actually, what Ms Mohi's highlighted there is, I think, one of the challenges we've got. When do we need a policy, and when is there sufficient to have operational procedures or other areas like that? And I think probably through the RMA Policy Committee is a very good place for that discussion to start. The manager of Consent Solutions and the GM of Operations should probably report back through that committee about what the current arrangements are. Now, I do know that there is a register and a process or a procedure in place for how things are flagged and who gets involved in discussions around sort of that iwi input into that consenting process. So that update is probably right to be put through RMA Policy Committee, and I think at that point is a really good opportunity for that group then to recommend, do we need a policy formalised through council, or are the current procedures and practices sufficient? And I think that's something that probably needs to be considered at a number of levels. I think philosophically that is one of the reasons why the review of the policy register has looked at removing a number of policies where they simply set or identify high-level objectives which are incorporated in a number of our strategies. And again, that's that reassurance I think you need to see with us bringing those to you to say, here's our strategy, this is why it's superseding or replacing what's been identified within a policy, and then we can also highlight where there's any other procedures or practice guides that are already in place as well. But at least you get that complete picture and that governance reassurance that that's been completed. But that's one of the reasons why as officers we've been going through saying, look, we're trying to use policies as the catch-all for a number of sort of strategic directions or high-level actions, as opposed to identifying, is it in a strategy and do we just need an operational procedure or a practice to put in place? But that's what we need to bring back through this committee for you to see.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Councillor Kent.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is to the wording that you've put up there as to whether that then precludes us reviewing, for example, the percent per hour policy, because we're approving it with the changes that you've said, and that's not what we're approving. We want to be able to make further changes should they be necessary, and I'm not sure that wording covers that.
Madam Chair, we're taking the attention there to remove the 2021 date. As far as the policy or the review, I think the percent of art, if you've got the next review as part of this LTP, we'd take that as one of those discussions. Similar to the conversation we just had with Mr Michaels about him presenting on where we are with infrastructure strategy, we can certainly bring forward into the long-term plan forums a discussion about the percent for art, which may then drive some of those subsequent policies as well, the public art policy as well. So if we have that in a forum, then that gives us a guide of where we go to with that policy.
Then can I just make a very minor suggestion that instead of just the column being headed next review, it should be headed next review on or before.
That's good.
That would then overcome and allow us to actually review things earlier.
Thank you, that's good. Drawing to a close now. I think, Your Worship, I had you down again, was that correct, or? No, thank you. Thank you very much. Oh, Councillor Gould.
Madam Chair, do you think we should make note in the recommendation number 2 somewhere that the next reviews for the 1st to the 12th, 17th, there's too many of them for that particular date that they need to be spread or anything?
Yes, I think we did have that discussion earlier on. Well, there was some comment made, and I think that's already been addressed, Councillor Gould. Thank you for bringing it up. Thank you. So I'd like to now, so there has been a mover and a seconder, moved by Councillor Stewart, excuse me, seconded by Councillor Donaldson. The recommendation is that the committee recommends to Council to approve the review of the policy register, including the changes to existing policies as amended, and that Council policies, including deletion of policies, is programmed within the Strategy, Policy and Finance Committee's work plan for review. Moved and seconded. I'll put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary? Thank you. Carried. Recommendation 2, property disposal policy. That's on page 26. Oh, yep, that's right. Just jumping ahead of myself. Thank you. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please, to receive the report, property disposal policy? Thank you, Councillor Hunt. Thank you, Your Worship. It's been moved and seconded. I'll put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Thank you. Good morning, Thomas. Good morning. Sorry, it's
Tyrone.
Tyrone. Good morning, Tyrone. Thank you.
Good morning, Madam Chair and councillors and board members. I'll take the report as read. I will just highlight, obviously, the fact that the reason why we have created this policy is to ensure a consistent approach with regards to the disposal of property going forward. The policy ensures that there's a robust process, and really the value or the purpose of the policy is ensuring those two, as well as managing our risk and in particular our legal requirements around property disposals. So with that, I'll just, any questions, Madam Chair?
Thank you. Councillor Stewart?
I'm absolutely delighted with the tenure of this policy, and it's a shame that Councillor Bentley isn't in here, because it was one of his requests that this be lifted in the priority list, so that the transparency was there. And certainly Appendix 1, Madam Chair, shows exactly the process that staff go through for disposal, but the decision comes back to this table, which is the end of the day. There's just one area of concern that I have on page 41 in terms of conflict of interest, and I just want to make sure, because I'm anti-corruption. I hate backhanders or any insinuation of backhanders or any opportunity for that. So under 8, conflict of interest, I've just written down, when I was reading through this, my thoughts along this lines: that members of council and associated boards, CCOs, standing committees, or members of portfolio strategy groups are also reminded of the advice of the Office of the Auditor General regarding conflicts of interest with regard to decisions making on the sale, purchase, marking and disposal of council land, buildings and assets. Whilst I just want to know, JP, in view of hearing what I've just written, whether number 8 is robust enough to cover all bases. I mean, it certainly covers us as members of council, but I just believe that because there are influences outside this council, that whoever's making these recommendations, if there is a conflict of interest, that is declared. I agree with the list on page, attached on page 1, but I think in what I've just said that it could be extended a little bit further, because there could be undue influence brought to bear via the CCOs through the associated boards, standing committees or the portfolio groups, where those people cannot bring that influence to bear and must declare an interest. And I just wanted to protect not only me, but protect everyone around this table, plus also protect council. I'll be open to any comment on it.
Thank you. Would you like to make a response to that? Thank you, Councillor Stewart.
I'm not sure I quite got it, but I guess I understand. Conflict of an interest is an interesting one. I think rest assured, with regards to the ability for outside organisations to influence in the decision making, is I think extremely difficult in the first case, and I think with regards to ensuring that all conflict of interest, in particular for officers, are being managed, is quite robust. I mean, we have a very simple rule. If you're associated with any of the property or any of the transactions or any of the other parties, you are just out of it. You cannot be involved with it whatsoever. So no staff member involved in any of these acquisitions or disposals is ever allowed to participate in any form and matter on it. So, and it is very crystal clear on that matter. So hopefully that answers your question.
What number 8 says, those people, but it doesn't cover elected. Yeah, we need a C. Yeah, it doesn't cover people who are part of the council organisation, who aren't covered by the delegations that are influenced through staff and through councillors, because we've got certain quite clear directives from the Auditor General that we must But you've got all these other people that are involved, and quite rightly, that's the system that Her Worship proposed and we all agreed to, with the portfolio groups, with the CCOs, with the standing committee, with the DITO, with the boards, they will also need to be covered. And I thought that maybe 8 was leaving us wide open for that. So I'll be guided by council. I don't want a big drama about it. I just want to make sure all bases are covered.
Yeah, I don't think you're making a big drama about it. I think, Councillor Stewart, you're raising a very, very good issue that we're widening the opportunity or the potential for conflict of interest that we might not be aware of. So I think it's a very relevant point. Your Worship, I know you wanted to make a comment on that.
And other elected members. So that's Te Tato Board and Lakes and Community Board.
If it included just board members, that would cover every CCO, it would cover both the community boards, it would cover Te Tato and the simple board members.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Berryman-Kim?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. And firstly, just on behalf of Te Tato, I'd just like to acknowledge both Tyrone and Thomas came to Te Tato to present a draft, which was really quite appreciated. There's just a couple of things, and there was some feedback which Te Tato sent in, which I don't see reflected in the version that's in our pack. So I just wanted to double check on a couple of things on that. So if you can bear with me, please, I'll try and be as brief as I can. First of all, there was a section on Māori interests, which was put in as part of the definition.
Can you just give us the page number so we can follow with you if you... Thank you.
Okay then, in our SPNF pack, I'm
Thank
on
you.
page 33.
Thank you very much.
Okay, and you'll see at the top is mana whenua, and the next item is property. We actually sent in, my understanding was we sent in some information just better defining Māori interests as a definition. So
Yes, look, it's a good point. We unfortunately received that feedback after the agenda was printed, and so you do each have a copy with that in your hands, and so this reflects the policy that will be adopted, taking into account the feedback from Te Tato.
Yeah. Sorry, actually just an answer that I think I might have a copy. I'm unsure as to whether the other board member committee members have a copy of the updated one.
My apologies, I thought it was being handed out.
No, we don't have that, and it would be good to have that. So thank you. You're speaking about something that actually, that we weren't aware of, some of us weren't aware of, that has actually already been included, taken cognizance of.
Madam Chair, my understanding is it's, and Carol's just updated me, it's been sent out to everyone through Stella as an update, as opposed to having a hard copy sent out. So sorry, there has been an amendment done to that page, but it went out electronically, not as hard copy. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yes, carry on, Mr.
In that case then, that might answer some of these, but I guess the slight difficulty is that it would appear some of the committee haven't actually had the chance to go through it, and I don't know whether or not it's worthwhile me talking it through, or whether there's another mechanism, because I'm assuming we're wanting to pass this today.
Yes, yes, we are. But please do carry on. If you've got, we've got. Bring it up on the screen.
Oh, come on.
We'll bring it up on the screen. That would cover off then, because you've got it there, haven't you? Yes.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I wasn't aware of that.
Sorry, and just two
Yes.
more points while we're waiting for that to come up on screen, if I may, Madam Chair. One of the things purely to help with the definition, and I'm not too sure if we sent this through, but we're wondering in the mana whenua assessment criteria list, we should include an assessment of iwi management plans held by council. So in the policy that we have, it is quite comprehensive, but one of the second points we thought of is actually the council has iwi management plans, a number of which the council has supported. That should just be part of the assessment. So there's just that point. Actually, the rest theoretically will be coming up on screen soon.
Yes, we're just going to try and access that. Thank you.
Oh, I'm quite happy to wait until that comes
All
up.
right then, thank you very much. So we'll continue and hopefully we can bring that up very shortly on the screen. Councillor Kent.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In line with what Councillor Sturt said, and I agree with Councillor Hunt, I think the list of those specifically mentioned on page 42 should include board members, which then does include board members of CCOs. But I think the bottom one, which just says any officer recommending or involved, should actually be changed to read any officer of council or its CCOs.
Clarifying it even further.
Covered.
Clarifying it even further. Thank you. Councillor Gould.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Page 41, clarification on conflict of interest. When you, on the second line, when you state immediate family, are you also stating nephews and nephews and nieces?
Well, I think immediate, but they would be immediate family, aren't they? Nephews and nieces are what I would say that are immediate family.
And then the other thing is, if it was Te Arawa land involved where you're selling or purchasing, would that mean every member of the Te Arawa association of 110,000 people or any council associated with them wouldn't be able to take part in the vote?
Well, that's a good question because it could be the whole tribe. So,
Madam Chair, I'm just looking across at these guys. Immediate family is generally immediate family, not, I would have thought, cousins and nephews and things like that.
Yeah.
And again, councillors, I've certainly acknowledged the couple of changes that I've picked up on some of that reasoning. So councillors and board members, and then any officer of council or CCOs. There's almost a. I'll hand over to Thomas to answer that off.
I think that last one is extremely restrictive. I mean, we are aware within the family there are approximately 500 FTEs or staff members, and I think sometimes as well we've got to be a little bit realistic. So it's very important to exclude individuals that are involved in this sort of stuff. So anyone in the property team or myself, for example, I or my family or my immediate members of my family or any of my associates cannot participate in this because, for transparency issues. But I think if there is someone working at the aquatic centre who is so far removed from any decision making or any understanding with regards to this, you cannot, I think, limit them with regards to participating in a... Yeah. Well,
property or the disposal of a property, and they have a vested interest in that going ahead, whether they're in Te Tau, a portfolio or whatever, they should have no influence whatsoever, and that conflict of interest should be declared. I think where Thomas is heading is, I mean, that's ridiculous. Under the Real Estate Agents Act, even if my uncle is involved in the process, I have to declare it under the Act, and I don't see the disposal or purchase of property, being any different than that. To retain transparency, no acts of influence, or even the thought of corruption. So that's where I'm heading. I think the amendments that have been made cover it quite clearly.
Well, and if I may reply, that's exactly my point, Councillor. And with the amendment with regards to I on page 42, by including any officer of council, you do go a bit beyond what you were saying. And that was my rationale for bringing that to your attention. That by doing that, it would, yeah, exactly. That was my point, Councillor. Yep.
Thank you. Thank you. We've got that up. Now I'll go directly to this one here. Thank you, Mr. Berryman Kemp, because you've raised these points, and I didn't have that information. I have got it here now, and it is up on the screen. So this is the additional that we now have before us. Thank you. Do you please?
Yes, thank you. And maybe just in the interest of time, if I can just talk through. So could you scroll up, please, to the next highlighted point? Yep, that's it. Thank you. Just for clarity for this committee, Te Tātou fed back in, and obviously we accept that there was a bit of a mix-up, but I am very aware that there's some amendments and changes. Just want to make sure that the committee are comfortable with them. Obviously, you can read them, but just to explain the rationale, really, a lot of the Te Tātou feedback was intended to make sure that we cover all bases, quite frankly. So inserting this is meant to be intended, potentially it is another stage in the process, but it means that you're more likely to pick up anything that may potentially be missed out. So we've requested the Māori interests line be put in, and the team has, for this committee's consideration. If we can scroll to the next one, please, mana whenua consultation. Again, this was intended to ensure that we cover as many things as we can, but also wanted, this was the area where we suggested adding in a review of iwi management plans held by council, because there may be information there regarding land interests. And I must say one more thing to add into that is with the upcoming mana whakahono agreements that the council may or may not be entering into with various iwi parties, it would be prudent to have a cross-check across those. So the intent of these is to make sure you cover as many bases as is possible.
Thank you very much, Mr. Berryman Kemp, for Te Tato seeking to have these included, because they are very helpful. And what we're doing is we're including them now and avoiding what could possibly take place further down the track. So that is really very valuable indeed. Sorry, JP?
Madam Chair, just it's the first time I've seen a couple of those as well, and actually I have an amendment that I think is quite important to do that. So if we can just roll back up to that. We're referencing an internal reference group of council in there, in the Te Amarangi group, and I think that's potentially not appropriate, because it kind of creates a structure where there may not be a structure, or there may be a different form. You know, as you know, we've got a new GM who's being appointed. So I think we probably need to say consultation with mana whenua as deemed appropriate by council. So that's again putting it into the organisational discussion as opposed to a sub-reference group within it. And obviously then we've got council referring also then to the GM in that space, and through the executive discussion as well. So I think to pick up specifically on an individual reference group is probably creating and we've talked about this previously about what we create with a policy then becomes a set of rules, which is a structure where a structure doesn't necessarily exist. So I think we just need to just be clear on that. So where we've got relevant to our Marangi business unit of council, it should just be to council. So we broaden it out then to make sure we get that wider reference into the executive and that new GM position as well.
Thank you, JP. So that means there are changes in two places up there under Māori interests and the mana whenua consultation. Thank you very much. Eugene, sorry. Yes, Eugene.
Yeah, if I could just respond, I understand the rationale that's been provided, JP, so thank you for that. But I guess the intention is that particular unit and the General Manager Māori position has been set up to ensure that the most appropriate components of council are involved in this discussion. So whilst I understand what you're saying, there was some concern over the Te Tato table that if we leave it as determined by council, effectively what that means is someone in council decides who's mana whenua to talk to. And that was the concern, as opposed to that particular unit or the General Manager Māori, whose specific role is to make sure that council are engaging with the right people. Do you see my rationale?
I do, but you're then suggesting that we have autonomous subparts as opposed to the organisation run by a chief executive who should get the right answer. Whether it's telling you to go to a particular unit for the right answer, actually that's the chief executive's organisational responsibility to ensure that occurs. So I'm not disagreeing that group would be involved in those conversations, and particularly the GM. But that's council's responsibility as an organisation.
And I can understand your anxiousness, or Te Tato's anxiousness. We've been down that track before, where someone has deemed it, yep, that's okay, we've consulted, blah, blah. So, but however, now we have an expectation, and council is here, and indeed it's from our officers that this, in fact, is what the process that will be undertaken in the future. But it's a good point, and we do, from time to time, need reminding of it. Thank you. Councillor, did you have, yes, Mr Moore?
Oh,
Sorry.
and I'm just wondering whether, because there were a couple of other changes, would it be prudent for me to talk to those now, or
No, yes, now
just
please.
so that everyone's quite
That's
clear?
fine, thank you.
Couple.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. If you could continue to scroll down, please.
Madam Chair, just unfortunately this is a PDF, so we're having to write down these amendments, so we can't actually do them live on screen for you.
Okay.
So do you know, oh, here we are. Is that's...
This is sorry, Madam Chair, through you. Again, this is probably along the same lines as the discussion that we just had. Te Tātou's feeling was actually there's dedicated units who are best placed to advise as to whether a property is not held for cultural reasons, and that relevant mana whenua have been engaged. So that, again, that was the intention behind this amendment. And in fact, probably the next one too. General Manager Māori, just ensuring that the correct component of council is involved in the project at the correct point in time.
I have to make some suggestions on that one there, I think, General Manager. Oh, yes.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I think the key things probably to come through here is, and again, I'm thinking on the hoof here, but again, it's a case of saying that council engage the relevant expertise to ensure that property being recommended for disposal is held for, so we again change Te Amarangi or Kaitiaki Māori to council, and maybe probably the addition there I would suggest is that council engaging with the relevant expertise, so that might be a case of then opening it up to our internal reference group as an inputter, and Kaitiaki Māori or the GM as being the relevant people. But again, we've got to see council as an entity in itself. So if I pick up on my wording changes here, that council engaging the relevant expertise, ensure that the property is being recommended for disposal. So I think those are probably the wording changes I would recommend need to be in place in those. Otherwise we start, as I say, creating a functional reference within the organisation when it's actually the organisation and Chief Executive's role.
Can I just comment on what you've just said, JP, because we're talking just above that on, we're I suppose focusing in on the Chief Financial Officer and his expertise. Then we've got the Chief Executive with his role, and yet what you're saying is in terms of General Manager Māori, we're just going to say council, and that to me, actually I was going to say discrimination, but actually that to me is actually saying, well, there'll be somewhat, we're going to put it in the general pool. So I think in this regard here, you might have to perhaps have a look at that. I'd like some comment. Thank you. Keen, I see you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I believe the two that you've got on the board should just be taken out completely and revert to what JP suggested, that council has to ensure that these things happen, because it's very specifically stated under B, under one of the others, that it has to be referred to Tātou anyway, so we don't have an issue. So those two can go because they're superfluous, because neither of those positions may exist under a different chief executive, for example.
So if they disappear, is there the potential that they'll disappear altogether in terms of what we're seeking there? Your Worship?
I just think I think it's quite a dangerous precedent to state that it should be driven just through Te Amarangi. I'm asked every day by people about purchase of land or land issues. Now, I don't necessarily only go and talk to Monty, for example, or Te Amarangi. I talk to a much wider group, which is what we should expect, and I take advice about either an individual or hapu, or it's not just through Te Amarangi. I think it's wrong to think that they are the reciprocity of all cultural knowledge. I often say to people, have you talked to Te Tātou? Go and talk to Taro and Jude, to make sure that we weave this through the right process. And it can be someone right outside of the organisation that gets involved. So I think it's really wrong to channel it through the expectation that we'll never do anything wrong because we've gone through Te Amorangi is quite narrow. I think it's better to keep it at the high level, as Councillor Kent said, about the taking appropriate advice.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Berriman Kemp.
If I can, and look, I appreciate the discussion, and it is a bit tricky, but actually, by the same token, effectively, that means if the team has gone in and had a chat to someone at Te Tātou who said, no, that's fine, then it can go through, and yet you've got a unit and a general manager who potentially may have inadvertently been locked out. So all we're trying to do with this, and actually I do go back to the wording, both of these are specifically about ensuring there's no iwi interests or cultural reasons involved. I'm not tied up about it being exclusive, but to me this is a safety check using mechanisms that the council already has in place, and what we're trying to do is just ensure that robustness of process goes through. And by the same token, just in response to Councillor Kent's point, those positions could change in the future. I mean, CFO, General Manager could change. It depends how deep do you want to go. I get back, the rationale is to ensure that in terms of the disposal of a property, that your team has access to the correct people to make sure that they have a robust process. Te Tātou's intention was to outline there are these in place. We accept that they may not be the sole ones, but these are actually in place.
And the potential to be overlooked is actually greatly lessened. Yeah, that's really what we're talking about. Yeah, thank you. Yes, JP.
Madam Chair, I think some of the issues there raised by Mr. Berriman Kemp are correct. And look, I pick up on the last sentence in the Kaitiaki Māori Te Amorangi Business Unit. Any issues of significance shall be shown in a statement of cultural significance to be included in any report put to committee or council. There's the information safety check, not who does it, but that deliverable is what's important. And through Madam Chair, I rolled down again just to look at the Chief Executive's wording, and I wonder if that statement I just said, if it was transferred into the Chief Executive statement, covers off the deliverable, that the Chief Executive is the direct manager and will usually consult with the leadership team, check recommendations, all policies and procedures, and then if we had a sentence following that, which is any issues of significance shall be shown in a statement of cultural significance. It's actually the Chief Executive, he's the apex of reports coming through to you and recommendations coming through to you. The structure of the organisation, as we've sort of tried to highlight, is not something we should anchor ourselves to, but it should be council and the CE's responsibility, and through that Chief Executive statement identifies through his leadership team, of which we now have a GM of Māori, and the key piece here, I think, which needs to be referenced into the report, is that where there is a contention, it has that cultural significance statement attached to any disposal decision. So that's the flag for a decision-making process. So, Madam Chair, again, I would just recommend that we delete both of those and just pick up that one sentence and transfer it across to the Chief Executive's piece.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Berriman Kemp. I'd like to thank you.
Again, I guess it's difficult. I understand the rationale, I understand the approach. The issue is we go into a whole different world of hurt if someone else is making a decision on cultural appropriateness and we are not sure that the General Manager Māori or your own team charged with that task has been involved in that process. So whilst I understand your rationale and I can see it, it's still an issue.
Yes, Your Worship, I'll let you point
The
out.
converse too, and I think the maturity of the organisation is an entirely different organisation than it was even 4 years ago. At times I've had discussions that have said, don't even go there, that is not a council issue. So I've received the cultural advice that you're better to leave it alone and leave it up to iwi to sort that out and don't climb in there. So it's quite the converse. And I'm always very reassured that the right process has gone through to give me that advice. So I think what you're seeking is a lofty sentiment, but I believe it has to be channeled through the Chief Executive to make sure that the right advice is received. And we've now got the organisational structure to respond to that.
Yeah, yes.
My point of order is that we had a CE that ignored that advice in the past. What I think Tou members are trying to do is to provide those safeguards that advice cannot be ignored. And if you can put the wording in the Chief Executive Officer's block that covers that, and with the scrutiny of Council, I'll be happy with that.
Thank you. Councillor Hunt.
Thank you. I mean, JP said one other sentence about expertise. It's really cultural expertise. And what's being missing here is the recognition of a cultural unit. We have a financial unit that falls under. So it's, for me, now at the moment it's called the Te Amarangi. That name may change. And the problem with naming positions is that the whole policy needs review every time the name of the unit changes. But if it's recognised as a cultural unit, just as the CFO is recognised as a financial unit, would that meet the needs of recognition in this instance without funneling it and narrowing the scope? But actually, for me, it's about acknowledging that these are one of the other bodies that are also
experts.
Experts,
absolutely.
Yes.
Madam Chair, the other kind of references I would make to it, and I certainly understand the reasoning behind as well. So the flip back is the same, but some of the safeguards I believe, and maybe we just need to sort of spend some time referencing them, is the flow chart itself is really explicit about the steps and the expectations. So whilst we're caught here trying to identify words that recognise that specific expertise internally, some of the steps within the flow chart are quite explicit as to some of that reasoning. So I wonder if it is, maybe we hold the discussion until we've been through the flow chart to see whether procedurally, as a policy itself, it gives you a framework that gives you the confidence that those things have to be covered off. Councillors, I would also reference you to probably 2 sections where there would be a lot of detail recognised within our existing reports, and that's usually on section 7, which is around community input, engagement and publicity. So that's a really important piece where we'd have to identify some of that. And also then some of those considerations sections as well. So that's where the specifics of that flow chart and those key questions would be referenced back into a report. And I think that is where the more the reference to the confidence that the right people have been engaged in the conversations through the Chief Executive signing off a report have been recognised. So if it's possible, Madam Chair, I wonder if it's worth going through the flow chart and those decision points just to give you the confidence about procedurally whether that's covered off in that most appropriate way.
Yeah, I'm happy to go through that now actually, so we can just get that clear. Thank you, Jay.
These guys are going to go.
Thank you. If you can go through that clear, and then we can put this one to rest. Or otherwise.
I'll ask Tyrone to do this one. I think the key, though, message before we go into this is that ultimately the list that you looked at before was really showing you the levels of the organisation that decisions go through as you actually work through this. So it was really the policy that sits in behind the flowchart. But in saying that, happy for Tyrone to go through the flowchart.
I'll try and get through this as succinctly as I can. So I suppose the first part of the flowchart is where you obtain a land status report, and that's a detailed history of the land, how the land was obtained, anything attached to it, any kind of flags, so Public Works Act, Reserves Act, any kind of issues around the treaty, any other caveats on the land, that sort of thing, they come up. So basically that's the first step that we go through before we even consider disposing of land. And that, I suppose, these first 2 boxes there. So the first box says, have you done a land status report? The second one says, make sure you take these 3 things into account specifically, because those are the 3 things that are really, I suppose, fishhooks. and if it is feasible, you move on. Not feasible, you retain the property. So I suppose then you move back down the flowchart. You've got, is the property culturally, and that's culturally as aside from Māori. So artistically, I suppose, like the museum, is it important like that? Is it an important community asset? I suppose that doesn't stop you from disposing of it. What it means is that you need to move on to consultation with the appropriate stakeholders. If it's not supported, you retain. If supported, you move down the flowchart. So is there critical council infrastructure? The building we're sitting in would be a good example of that. So yes, you'd secure ownership rights, and I suppose that one, there should probably be a retain out the side of there, so that's an oversight. But if you do still want to move forward, what you would do is you continue the disposal process. So you'd secure the proper access rights. So say if we had a sewage pump station on a large portion of land that would be better used as, this is a completely hypothetical, that would be better used as residential property, what you'd do is you'd secure an easement or right of access to it, and you could then continue the disposal process. You'd see, is the property gifted reserve? And that's gifted reserve in the sense of all kind of gifted reserves. So we have reserves vested in us by families. I suppose there's the Ngāti Whakaue gifted reserves. So if it is a gifted reserve, you move on. That would be a flag in your land status report. So you'd move on to commence your consultation with the appropriate stakeholders. If it's not supported, you'd retain. If supported, you move forward. I suppose then you move to, is it appropriate to consult with mana whenua? And I suppose in most cases you would if it's a significant property, but then there'd be some cases, say if there's a small portion of road that's on the corner of someone's property, like I think a matter come up in front of council at the last SPNF, that one there probably not the case because it's about 5 metres of land, 5 square metres of land. So if it is appropriate, you commence appropriate consultation. If it's not supported, you retain it, and there's actually a little bit more out the side if you scroll across there, Carol. A little bit more. And then that's when you would follow the appropriate, I suppose, protocol, agreement or procedure or policy, and then it would kind of step outside this policy and move on to something else that would follow the procedure in that external process. So if we go back across to the policy there, so this one here is, has the property undergone a change of use from public to non-public work? Classic example of that would be Victoria Arterial. So what you do there is, I suppose, consider the practicalities of dealing with the associated public works implications before moving on, because basically once you declare it as surplus, it's surplus. So we need to basically consider at that point whether there's any other public work need for that property. So it would be, if we are going to use that in 50 years to put a pump station on it, should we retain it now instead of selling it and having to acquire it later on at a higher price? So if it is viable to sell, after that process you'd move forward. If it's not viable, you'd retain it. So the next one is the property currently being held and actively utilised for a core purpose or activity? And basically there's a definition of that inside the policy. It's comes straight out of the Local Government Act, so that's roading, infrastructure, that sort of thing. And strategic land retention, which we don't have a strategic land retention policy or strategy at the moment, so that moves out to a whole other process where there's performance criteria, which I probably won't go over now because it's quite large. So it just goes.
Yeah, so we may just be able to stop there, because I think you can get the feeling of that by the time we've gone through all of that, we've had to talk to a lot of people, and I think JP wants to add something.
And Madam Chair, just to again sort of pick up on some of that, the virtual nature of the whole council being involved. If you go back to those first couple of boxes there, which is some of that land history research, yes, that's usually led out of the property team who take the lead in preparing these kind of reports. But as an example, Mr. Manley, who's involved in researching, he's a researcher within the organisation. He works within the virtual Te Amarangi team, but he actually sits in the strategy team. So he has a responsibility as a researcher, providing some of the basis to go into that report. So And again, also partnership advisors, Jenny Rennie would be involved potentially if there was other conversations to be had outside of the organisation. So if we limit the conversation to what is the core Te Awamurangi team or business unit, then we actually miss that the whole organisation must be involved in preparing some of these research pieces to make sure we're coherent and we actually get the right answer.
Thank you, and thank you for that appendix and the explanation of the process. It's a wonder anything actually gets disposed of when you look at that. I'd like to move. I'd like to move forward with. There's quite a number of people who want to speak. Ms. Mohi.
Oh, kia ora tātou. So, just wanting to bring us back to why Te Tātou has this concern. So, there's no firm directive that the mana whenua and assessments and the cultural appropriateness of the decision making. That's the basis of our concern. So in the Appendix 1, the first box talks about, I need my microscope, but the land status report has the correct acquisition history, including the treaty matters. So my first question is, so who vets that, that is correct after that report, that brief report has been developed by the property team? And then as we move down the matrix, you get to probably the fifth box down. Is it appropriate to consult with mana whenua? Again, my question, who determines that? So that then leads into the decision-making table, the draft we have up here. And I agree with you, Madam Chair, around the interestingness of having group manager, business support, chief financial officer in there and clearly defined in their role. However, there is a suggestion that the general manager role Māori be removed. I look at those two authorities, or the way that's been defined. We could potentially reword that general manager Māori role to reflect similar wording to the one previous. So the bit that really jumps out is the second sentence. The general Māori manager will also check that any recommendation made is in accordance with council policies, procedures, and does not have any adverse cultural or mana whenua implications. So it reflects the same wording, they're of the same status. It then recognises the mana that each of those positions hold and their role, in particular, one's about finance, one's about cultural. So it's just ensuring that those things, we can be reassured, not just us Te Aroha, is reassured that there is actually someone holding that mandate to check on behalf of Te Aroha and mana whenua. I could live, this is just personally just me, I could live without the kaitiaki Māori, Te Awamurangi business part, but although I like your suggestion, change it to cultural unit, because I would then assume the general manager Māori would then liaise with that group through her process. However, I think it's very important that we keep that there. Again, I think it reflects that fairness, and that's probably my key thing around that. I really would insist. Well, I'm not sure what the wording is, but I think that needs to stay.
Thank you for that, and you're attributing the expertise to the right person to be able to check that any recommendations made, as you've suggested, that's already stipulated there for the chief financial officer, and why couldn't that be actually put in there under the general manager Māori, because of the expertise and because they're seeing with those eyes. Right. Thank you,
just
Ms.
one more
Mohi.
point. Sorry, I think too the suggestion Eugene had to add to the mana whenua consultation list the assessment of IMPs held by council and any potential mana whakahono arohi agreements that come in. Those would be quite integral to ensuring these processes. It's another component of making sure that these are the documents put in by hapu, by mana whenua, showing who they are. The general manager is part of that assessment, and it sort of all lines up quite nicely. So, yeah.
Thank you, yes.
So I'd like to move that way, please.
Madam Chair, can I just, again, Thomas signalled I think that's a really good thing, just to be specific about the management plans. And I think procedurally we would have picked those up, but I think we should be explicit about those. So I think that's a minor amendment that should be just reflected within the documentation. Again, councillors, can I, my concern about is writing this on the hoof here. And again, I certainly pick up the inconsistency then if we're saying we're removing the GM Māori or the Kaitiaki Māori position from this whilst leaving the GM or the CFO. Actually, I would have said the amendment I would possibly be recommending is that it should all come in under the Chief Executive. You've got reference there to the CFO. The GM Māori could be included within that statement, and the wider executive is important there. So actually the intent, and I think what you're highlighting there is an inconsistency to say the CFO is mentioned, but the cultural aspects are ignored. Actually, both of them all come under the same Chief Executive mandated sign-off. So if we actually went away, councillors, with your support to make sure that the key elements come together under that Chief Executive's banner, recognising GM Māori, recognising CFO, recognising the wider executive, and that statement of cultural significance in that one statement, I think we've simplified this down to be the intent we've tried to say, which is council and the Chief Executive as the signer-offer of these reports is the critical aspect, and all of those aspects are considered and reflected in their roles under the Chief Executive. If that would meet those sort of the mana discussions and why one's mentioned and not the other, if that's appropriate.
Thank you for that. Councillor Maxwell.
Yeah, Madam Chair, whilst I have every faith in the current setup and the people who are dealing with it and the CEO, I just have a question mark to the future. Hence why I am actually supporting Councillor Berryman Camp and Gina Mohi on the fact of having a bit more substance to wonderful new structure and units that we have set up, like Te Amorangi and various things, because I still haven't forgotten that we were badly burnt by the Environment Court over the Rotorua area, and the late Mauri Ora-Kingi was involved in discussions, but his advice was ignored, and that was in print in the paper, and because he was one person in a group of people. Yeah, I mean, that still hurts than that now. I think it was $110,000 we lost, but more. There was even more. So I would prefer that we try and incorporate even more of just the general, the CEO, and leave it there. Hence my reluctance in support of what is coming through here.
I think what has been suggested by JP in terms of rolling that into the CEO's responsibilities, I think would be go some way. Councillor Kent.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, I concur with that approach, and I make the point that what we're actually setting down here is a process that is to be followed, that has to be independent of how we structure this council or how a chief executive decides it wants to structure it in the future. So to actually tie it into individual roles is wrong. Yes, take out the Kaitiaki Māori. Yes, take out the chief financial officer. He shouldn't be there either, because it may not be his role under a revised structure of this council. So yes, the responsibility should be there, clearly expressed with the chief executive, to actually make sure that the correct cultural procedures have been followed, and it is his role to make sure that happen. Otherwise, we're interfering with how he runs the business.
Councillor Kent. Councillor Donaldson, and then your worship. Sorry for the wait.
It's okay. Look, I think it's all been said in this regard. I get back to Councillor Sturt's point on the conflict of interest. I'm almost tempted to ask this, or seek to ask this in confidential, but it just needs some clarification, because that sentence at the bottom of 41 is a pretty long sentence to get your head around. But if I can just pluck out a couple of key lines, is that saying that any trust of which a conflicted person, one of those on the next page, has an interest, shall not be allowed to purchase council-owned land under any circumstances. Is that what that's saying?
Yep, that is what they're saying.
I can see a clear conflict already, and I don't want to talk about it in open session, Madam Chair, but
It does exclude certain types of trusts there.
Isn't the issue really about declaring that interest?
no, this is saying it can't purchase. The trust can't purchase. According to Her Worship, the trust I'm talking about is not.
Sorry, I'm not familiar with what the...
And look, Madam
obviously-
Chair, I don't want to
Right.
elaborate in open session, but can I ask that question for clarification in confidential?
Thank you.
I suppose it's only if a conflicted person is involved in that trust. On the next page, it says that. So that this section around conflicts of interest excludes all of these people from purchasing. There's nothing about a declaration of conflicts of interest. So that should maybe be something that's added in as well.
Thank you. And Your Worship?
Look, just a very quick one on your flow chart. The second box, I don't like the word artistically important. Artistically is only deemed in the eye of the beholder. But I think it is the property is culturally and historically important. I think of the way you transacted with NZTA Lake Road, and you managed to include in there retention of the water troughs for the horses. That was very important. No, but it is important. So the historical importance is very significant. So I don't know why it's written artistically. I've never seen that in statutory documents before.
I suppose when we were drafting the policy, we were finding it difficult to actually define that as opposed to, I suppose, Māori interests. Because when you put culturally, people tend to jump directly to that, whereas that's a separate issue that's dealt with further on.
You also need to remember the significance of Historic Places Trust New Zealand, and the historical importance of our district. So I wouldn't, you can say aesthetic,
Yeah, I think that's a much better word.
artistically. Yeah, it's only a small word, but really it's, otherwise we'll be arguing as something important.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think we've had sufficient. Ms. Mohi, you have one final comment to make?
Just a quick one. I'm just unclear about that conflict of interest wording. Does that mean if a person was a trustee on a trust that's not one of the exempted ones, and they said, I'm conflicted, I cannot vote, that whole trust is still out? They cannot. That whole trust is penalised?
Well, that would be my understanding. If you're representing that trust, that would be my understanding.
Madam Chair, I think the point here is identifying the conflict of interest. So if I sit on Trust X and there's a desire to sell a piece of property to Trust X, I would have to be completely excluded from any involvement in the process or the report. Yes. Equally, as governance, you would be excluded from decision-making on that decision. But that Trust X could still purchase that piece of property.
That's the point that I'm after.
The key is that you're not in any way influencing the decision-making or voting to benefit Trust X. That's the conflict of interest we're trying to identify.
Yeah, that was that little point there, was the trust excluded as a result of you being and my last point really was the statement about Te Aroha being conflicted. I guess it's more of an ethical point or principle to be raised, is that it's sort of interesting that Māori or tangata whenua, because we all talk about being related, we become all conflicted, yet it doesn't seem to apply the other way. Although I'm sure there's a lot of family connections going on in the non-Māori groupings within Te Aroha, within Rotorua. So I find that pops up a lot in commissioner work, but I think it's dangerous to start making those statements because it becomes a little bit biased.
I take your point, Ms. Mohi. However, because we hold major land interests within this area, most times we actually are conflicted. You know, anything going through the land court, you can bet your boots, some or all of us have some interests there. So,
Sure.
but as long as that interest is declared. Can I just say that recently Councillor Gould and myself, we attended or took part in a webinar conflict of interest session here. It was only 40 minutes long. And I don't know about Councillor Gould, but I found it so helpful because all around the country there's this heightened awareness now of conflict of interest, and it was an update, and I learnt things that actually I thought I knew and I didn't know and have been changed, and more information is now being asked. And so I just wondered if perhaps that presentation, although you won't hear the discussion that took part by the presenter, if that couldn't be distributed to councillors, because I think you'd find it very helpful. I don't know, Councillor Gould, I know you and I we were asking questions of the presenter all the time and getting them out with the help of Hilda, so, and good responses we got too. Can I just say, I found this session very good, but I actually have found it rather messy. I wasn't aware that these changes had been made, and so we've had a lot of discussion that actually could have been avoided had we had, JP wasn't aware of it. It's good that we've had input from Te Tato, and the changes have been recommended, but we've had discussion that could have been, I'm not saying avoided, but we could have greatly been reduced had we had this paper beforehand, and it would have only required, please be aware, something additional has been emailed or sent to you. So I'm just asking that, yeah, thank you very much, because this is really important, and it's been very good discussion, so thank you, councillors. I'm now going, what did we end up with a recommendation? There was going to be a small change, was there not? Because this goes to full council, and there were some recommended changes.
Madam Chair, we've picked up on a number of comments, and if we'd like to sort of take this through as a recommendation, I think the only wording change would be as amended. What I'd like to do with Thomas is make sure that we go now through and we do a track change, and just make sure that we've captured the intent and the breadth of the conversation, rationalise that down so that when you see it coming through to council, the debate that's occurred today is reflected in that amended version for you to finalise. We can certainly obviously recirculate that to the Te Tato members who have input into it to make sure that we get back that input to say, does this capture where the debate went, so that you have the confidence as council that when you adopt this at the end of the month, that it is reflective of what's been discussed here. And I just, again, make the emphasis too on Ms Mohi's comments around being captured, being Te Arawa, as if you're conflicted. Again, it's that close association with a trust. So the conflict of interest section, I think we will be amending to make it really clear that what's the intent here is that where you are directly conflicted, you're not involved or you're stepping away from the decision making, not that you're simply part of Te Arawa. So that intent needs to be cleared out as well, and the detail was improved for that as well.
Thank you. Before I put yes, thank you, Councillor Ken.
Madam Chair, I was going to suggest that we actually move that this matter lie on the table until we receive the track changes, because it's a very important issue. We don't want to just rush this through and make a mess of it.
I think we can, it's going to come to full council. We'll have the changes there. We will have the changes there. And if we have to take the time at full council to discuss it.
But if it's going to full council, then you're excluding those who've made comments around this table here?
Yes, I think.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I was suggesting that we'll be trying to pick up the changes, circulate them as track changes, make sure that they accurately reflect, or at least pull together the compromise position of what has been amended to get across the intent which has been discussed here, so that you have the confidence at council to either approve it, or if you're still unsatisfied, send it back.
So are you saying then that those changes that have been made as a result, or that will be made as a result of the discussion that we've heard, are particularly coming from our Te Tato representatives, because that's basically been where most of this discussion is centred, that they will have some input, well they will be beside you making those changes to truly reflect what's the discussion that we've obviously had this morning?
That's correct, and when we bring it to council, Thomas will be able to report that he's worked through those wording changes with those members who aren't in attendance at the council, so you've got the confidence of saying yes, it has been properly worked through before it goes to council.
Thank you very much. Yes, I'd like us to proceed with this recommendation. This has been a long time coming, and so I think we should proceed. Thank you very much. It's been moved by Councillor Kent. Thank you, Councillor Gould. It's been moved by Councillor Kent that the committee recommends to Council to adopt the proposed property disposal policy as amended and with attachment 1. So it's been moved and seconded. I'll put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, thank you, carried. I'd like to take a 5-minute break, please, councillors. Thank you, councillors. Can you make your way back, please? Councillor Mohi, you've got something you want to... Thank you.
Oh, aroha mai, kia ora tātou. I'm just wanting to inform the council that I'll probably be popping off before 1 o'clock.
Before 1
That's
o'clock.
okay.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you. So recommendation 3, I'd like to call for a mover and a seconder, please, to receive the report, transfer of Thermal Holiday Park to Ngāti Whakaue be received. May I have, thank you. I'll have a mover, that's Councillor Maxwell, and a seconder, Your Worship. Thank you. I'll put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, thank you, carried. Good morning, Henry. Thank you for the overview you're going to present.
Kia ora, Madam Chair, and councillors and board members. And I guess we go from property policy to property transfer, so we can look at the reality of transferring property. And I guess, look, I won't take too long going through it. What I'd say probably at the start is that on one level this is a reasonably straightforward matter. On another level it's actually really incredibly complex. And I guess the couple of things I'd say at the start is what we're asking for at the outset is a resolution from council which will trigger a process. Ultimately, as you'll have seen in the paper, the outcome of the process is essentially determined by a public process and the outcome of running through the Reserves Act revocation processes. So just a little bit of background, and the piece of land we're talking about was gifted as part of the original Ariki Kapakapa block. A century and more ago, it was gifted for education and recreation purposes. And from what I can really see from the history, it became relatively contentious in about the 1950s when the commercial holiday park operation was established. And prior to that, just in the late 1940s, the Crown had moved responsibility for managing the reserve across to the Rotorua borough, I think in the late 1940s. So the land then, and the whole gifted land issue, as most of you will know, went through the treaty settlement in 1993. All the treaty settlement essentially did was lead to a commitment from the Crown that it would look at processes around dealing with gifted land going forward. What then happened was the council entered into a protocol arrangement with Ngāti Whakaue in terms of how it would deal with gifted land issues, and Land Information New Zealand have also done a similar protocol in terms of how they deal with and dispose of Crown land generally. So where we are now essentially is with a piece of land about 12 hectares. It is mixed use. I would say probably about 2/3 of it is a commercial holiday park. Then there's some land which is still used primarily for students for recreation, but is also open to the wider public. And there's also student accommodation on the site. And I guess the last thing I'd say, the discussions that have gone on now for a number of years. There have been a number of commitments and semi-commitments made over that time. But probably the encouraging thing at the moment is that the discussions have been 3, sometimes 4-way, and Pukeroa and Toi Ohomai have had good discussions and are positive about the potential of their working relationship going forward. So really from a council point of view, what we're asking you to do is have a look at triggering the process, which needs to happen under the Reserves Act, and probably the most consequential implication for the council is the loss of the ongoing revenue. So I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, Henry. Yes, Councillor Kent.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you. Can I just pick up on something you said there, Henry? You said the land was gifted for education and recreational use. That's not what it says in the report, because the whole report is phrased based on recreational use. It's not being used for recreational use, therefore it should be given back. If, however, the land was gifted for education and recreational use, then it is currently being used for an educational use. So why should it go back?
I think the complexity that comes in here is that the wider Ariki Kapakapa block was much bigger. The purposes around recreation and education do apply, but the land at the moment is held for legal reasons as a recreation reserve. So it is being used for educational purposes to a limited extent now. The commercial holiday park is really owned as a commercial venture by Toi Ohomai. Fundamentally, from their point of view, probably could be any other investment, but it is purely a commercial investment on their part. But some parts of the land are used for some student accommodation. There is some recreational use by students as well. So it's not completely black and white, because the 12 odd hectares, it is mixed use.
Your Worship.
It's not a question. I just want to comment, Henry, that this is great it's come to this conclusion. I recall being involved in this when I was Minister of Conservation, and it was just a slither of a part in here. But this actually triggers the right process with an end result that has been long awaited by the tribe. And a request, I don't know how many times they would have come down to government asking that this be done, but there were several other bigger land tracts that had to be sorted. And I congratulate you, Henry, because your knowledge of land and the Crown role, and now what you bring to Council, shows that we're clearing up a backlog of very small and very complex parcels of land. So this has been a very, very long process, very protracted, very frustrating, and this is the right outcome by triggering these recommendations today. So I would love to move 2, 3 and 4.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Councillor Stewart. Thank you. Councillor Maxwell. Yep.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Your Worship, the Mayor's covered the other points, and I wholeheartedly support those. And this has been going on since 2011, I think, all the discussions with all the various bodies, and I've been on the Ngāti Whakaue gifted protocols group, and it's come up there at certain times, and that, so this is a very good outcome. The other one I'm pleased is that the portion B is the area that, if I recall, we've gone down there a lot on labour, what do you call it, those Arbor Day planting and various things. It's a very good area for recreation, but I think the whole outcome, and I too say, like the Mayor, very pleased with the outcome that you've been able to bring forward to us all.
Berryman Kim.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the report. And yes, it certainly looks as if it's a robust process, and I don't want to hold that up. Just drawing your attention to page 49.7. My question is, the statement there is that the affected iwi is Ngāti Whakaue, and I fully understand that relationship has been in there. My question is, however, well, actually, the question is, have you confirmed if there are any other iwi interests potentially involved in that block? And I'm specifically referencing the current issues regarding the joint trust with Te Puia, which of course is just across the road. So I just want to make sure that the council is absolutely rock solid that Whakaue are the only affected iwi.
Thank you.
Rock solid's probably quite ambitious. But yes, and this has been one of the issues really over the last 2 or 3 years, affecting both discussions around the Hemo roundabout and also this piece of land. And we have gone backwards and forwards a little bit with the Crown over it. And really the general consensus that has come through is really through the 1993 treaty settlement and the process the Crown committed to over dealing with the gifted land, working through Pukeroa is the appropriate way to do it.
Thank you. And I suspect if anybody thought they were being overlooked in the last few years, they would have made their presence known, as we're seeing right now and in another matter. Councillor Sturt.
Yeah, as the member of the Ngāti Whakaue Reserves Protocol Committee, we've had this come to us since 2011, and we as a Reserves Protocol, which is a joining of forces from councils from Chief Executive, the Mayor, myself, the Deputy Mayor, and members of Ngāti Whakaue, not exclusively POT, but this has been before us several times. We agreed to this process some 12 months ago, and the checking of some of the issues that Mr. Berriman Camp raised had to be assured before we brought this to council, and it's brought forward to council. The only one who's going to lose out is council. This is one of the reserves that was gifted to the people of Rotorua, and like any of the other gifted reserves, if the purpose for what it was gifted for changes or alters, it's in the agreement, it must be offered back to iwi. So I implore my colleagues to support this. The alternatives to this are then Ngāti Whakaue lodging another claim and another protected Treaty of Waitangi process, and the risk of being awarded compensation. I mean, council has earned a lot of money off this particular reserve for very little input for a long period of time. So I'm of the opinion that this is the best way forward. Let's move it forward. There's no request for compensation or because the lease is in place with Te Oho Mai, so that will carry on. There are no affected parties in terms of loss of use of it. Hardly any members of the public have been down there using it for recreation. I've seen a couple of dogs running on the reserve down by Moncur Drive, but other than that, nobody else. So I ask my colleagues to support this as an act of good faith with a group of people who are supportive of the goals and ambitions of this council. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sturt. Councillor Gould.
Madam Chair, page 45, I note that the term of the lease is 33 years from 2005, which makes it 2038. My two questions to you: are you certain the lease is watertight for Wairiki to be the leasee from Ngāti Whakaue? And two, what's the present rate rental reviews? Are they every 2 years, or every 3 years, or every 5 years?
We're certainly confident in terms of the transfer of the lease and the obligations, and that would be a commitment that goes with the land and through the negotiations that'll take place. I'm not sure about the rent reviews. I would suspect 3 or 5 years. Tyron's saying 5 years, so every 5 years. But one of the frustrations really for Toi Oho Mai in terms of dealing with the council in this sort of tripartite agreement is that the council is really sitting in the middle, and where they often want significant changes to the leases to further their own ends. It gets very difficult in terms of the three-way relationship. So the discussions that have been had so far suggest that they'll probably do better without us in that sense.
I think we've been rather passive in that regard in the past. Councillor Tapsell.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and I really just wanted to acknowledge our staff, in particular Henry, who have worked on this for many years. And I just wanted to say, especially with the conversation of the previous agenda notices, this is one of the examples of the amazing things that happen when we work together with iwi and with our community organisations, in this case Toiho Mai. And I'm just so pleased that this is on the table, and like Councillor Stewart, encourage everyone else to support this as well. And I'm just really excited to see what other things start coming our way after this success.
Thank you, Councillor Kent.
Thank you, Madam Chair, through you. Just under the financial budget considerations, you're pointing out that currently Council obtains a revenue from this piece of land of $106,695 per annum. Am I right in thinking that because if this transfers, because it's a commercial operation, that property will then become rateable, and therefore the loss to Council won't nearly be $106,000?
I suspect you're probably right, Councillor, that it will take on a different nature.
Thank you. Thank you. Good question. Thank you. If there's no further questions, it has been moved. Recommendation 3 has been moved. 2, 3 and 4. Sorry, it's been moved by by Mayor Chadwick and seconded by Councillor Stewart. I'll read them out to you. 2, that the committee recommends to Council that the land shown as B is surveyed and amalgamated by Council with the adjacent land known as Centennial Park. 3, that the committee recommends to Council that subsequent to the amalgamation outlined in recommendation 2 above, Council completes an agreement between Council, Crown, Toi Ohomai as owner of the leasehold interest and Pukeroa Orua Whata Trust, outlining the intention that the land comprising the thermal holiday park and shown as A is returned to Ngāti Whakaue by way of the vehicle of Pukeroa Orua Whata Trust Attachment 2. And 4, that the committee recommends that Council, upon the execution of the agreement referred to above, notifies the Minister of Conservation that the recreation reserve status of the thermal holiday park land should be revoked in accordance with the provisions of the Reserves Act 1977 and on the basis that it is no longer being used in accordance with the intent of the original gift. It's been moved and seconded. I'll put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, thank you, carried. Yes.
Just on that wording there, should that be option 2 rather than attachment 2? Because I don't see an attachment 2.
The map, it's just the map, I think. That was...
Map's figure 1.
Max.
Okay.
Thank you. Now we're on the general bylaw. Thank you. Recommendation 4, review of the general bylaw 2011. I'd like a mover and a seconder, please, that the report be received. Thank you, Mrs. Trumper. Thank you, Councillor Donaldson. That the report review of the general bylaw 2011 be received. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, thank you. Thank you, Councillor Stewart. Thank you, Councillor Donaldson. It's been moved. Oh, sorry. Yes, thank you. Yes.
It's just process. I mean, it's just, it certainly details what it's all about. And,
yes.
You know, under the Local Government Act, we have to review these bylaws. That's been done. There's nothing contentious. And as I say, I'll move 2 and 3 and take it as read.
Yeah, I think, yes. Thank you. Thank you. I don't think there are any comments. Oh, sorry, Mr. Berryman, Kemp.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I have just one question regarding on page 51. I note the general bylaw applies to cemeteries and crematoria. My question is, what is the impact on Urupa on Marae land?
You're talking Urupa, or no? Yes.
Yes, and I guess just to provide some background to that question, I'm a little unsure whether or not this bylaw applies to council-owned cemeteries and crematoria or privately run and privately owned ones. And I'm very cognizant of the fact that with our population, we have a number of Rotorua, a number of marae, that I just want some clarification as to whether or not this bylaw impacts on or not.
Thank you. Thank you. This is actually council controlled. Thank you.
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair. So in the Model General Bylaw on which that's based, it basically states that the purpose of this part of the bylaw is to enable council control and set standards for the operation of cemeteries and crematoria within the boundaries covered by council's responsibility or ownership.
Thank
you. So
yes, I think that's very clear. Thank you. Councillor Gould?
With number 3, with the replacement map, are you saying that's also covers a skateboard?
yes, the intent of the map is to make it really clear with the new sideways that are in place that those are also open to skateboarders, and it's really just been a series of changes over time that's really just trying to be explicit about. Originally council had an area that the CBD was out of limits to skateboards, and now we're saying that they're, like other wheeled devices, they're welcome on the shared sideway.
I'd like to respond. As a former retailer of the CBD, the skateboard's actually very difficult to enforce. So you're going to have, it's not going to be possible to enforce that rule at all. And I don't think the police will be keen on taking skateboards off people either.
No, I don't think. Thank you. Do you want to comment on that, Rosemary?
So when we talked fairly widely with staff about this bylaw and the need to review and whether there was a need for any changes, we talked to people about how is this working, and my understanding is there isn't a serious issue with skateboards like there was when that restriction was first put in place. It wasn't something that people are getting calls about or concerns about at the moment, so there was simply no need to really want to change it other than to clarify where it's required. So it hasn't been a particular policing issue in recent years, and I guess maybe that's because we also have a skate park really nearby.
Thank you. And I think there's more responsibility now being exercised by those who choose to skateboard. Ms Mohi?
Kia ora no. So just picking up on the cemeteries, crematoria, Urupa, more just something to think about. So Urupa provide quite a significant service to the community, particularly given the significant Māori population. I'm just wondering if there's any consideration from council, on council's part, towards showing some support to the fact that their marae are taking care of a role that usually sits with council, and I don't know what that might look like, but I just wanted to just chuck that out there, and it might even look like something like a rebate on rates or water, because every Urupa has a tap. Just something to think about. I just want to throw that out there in terms of just some, what do you call it, quid pro quo type thing. And the second point was just around the skateboard bylaw. So I see, we're going to come down a bit harsher. I noticed there perhaps maybe a warning before you start taking the skateboards off the kids, because you're into conflict straight away. If you just rolling up, hey, I'm taking your board, perhaps working with the Māori wardens rather than the police, if we have a sort of a more gentle relationship with our rangatahi. And I guess the last point is, so if we're going to get hard over here, when is the skate park going to get some love? If we're taking that away from them, what are they getting in return? So yeah, so it's, going to smack with the stick over here. Got any carrots? Yeah.
I don't think we should be making an issue of the skateboarders, because really of recent times we used to have some issues, particularly in town centre, and I have to say a lot of it's focused on that focal point in the city focus, and the people assemble there, and then but it has definitely subsided in terms of activity in and around, and certainly the intention is not to be the big police with the stick and thing like that. That's not the intention. JP, you wanted to?
Madam Chair, just a couple of points there. Urupa are non-rateable, or they get the full rates remissions. So there is a sort of a protection of that land that's involved in Urupa. My understanding is it's...
No, I think you have to apply.
Yeah, so it's a statutory requirement. Yeah, so it is automatic. It should automatically be in place.
I schedule the general rates
Yeah.
remitted as well.
Yeah, that's correct. So only service charges apply to marae. So it's within the legislation, so it's automatic. And the second one, just about discussions around, there's been obviously a lot of good consultation around the skate park and skate park planning, and that obviously comes into the long-term plan forums. So it's part of that discussion about where that project sits within that LTP.
Thank you. Well, thank you. It has been moved and seconded, so, and it is what it is, this piece of work, it is what it is. So I'm going to put 2 and 3, that consideration has been given to the requirements of the Local Government Act 2002, and following a review, it is proposed that no amendments be made to the General Bylaw 2011. 3, that the committee recommend to council to resolve that, in accordance with clause 206.3 of the Public Places section of the General Bylaw 2011, the first schedule to the Public Places section of the General Bylaw 2011, showing areas where persons shall not ride a skateboard, be replaced with a replacement map as attached to this report, attachment 3. Yes, thank you.
Point of order, Madam Chair. Does 2 not conflict with 3?
Well, no changes, yes, what you're saying, but there is actually a change to this one. I see. Because there is a change. Oh, it's not an amendment, so yes.
Sorry, through you, Madam Chair, the need to change a bylaw or amend it is triggered by things which you need to make a decision and then it goes out for special consultation. The ability to simply amend and replace that map doesn't require it doesn't trigger that same requirement. You can do that by resolution. It doesn't need to go out for a full consultation process. Right.
So thank you very much. That's good and clear. So it has been moved by Councillor Stewart, seconded by Councillor Donaldson. I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, thank you. Carried. Thank you. Recommendation 5, page 70. Thank you. I'm just getting there. I'd like to call from a mover and a seconder to receive the report, spatial plan, special consultative procedure, hearings format be received. Thank you. You've moved by your worship, seconded by Councillor Gould. I'll put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Thank you. Thank you. Una, you're just going to give us an overview?
Yes, I am. Carol,
Thank
if
you.
you could just bring that slide up for me, please. So, councillors, you will all be aware that the spatial plan special consultative procedure is now open for public feedback and response. What we've got here today is we're seeking support from yourselves to look at a introduction of a more council community friendly way of receiving verbal feedback from our community based on the draft spatial plan. So you'll all be aware when we do a special consultative procedure, traditionally we run a hearings process where only those who have provided a written submission are enabled, I suppose, to come in and present to yourselves with a 5 or a 10-minute talking slot. Over time we are seeing that less people feel comfortable in presenting to council that way. It does mean that the only way that you can come in and be heard is if you have actually written a written submission. Receiving written submissions, as we know, is becoming difficult as well. And if we also go back to the legislation, there is actually no such thing as a submission or hearings in the legislation. So it does give us quite a bit of freedom to be able to receive responses in whichever format we wish to do so. So we are continuing with all our current ways of receiving responses, and you'll see up there on the slide, so everything that we still currently do around receiving written responses, we will still be undertaking. And we are going to also allow and receive those that want to ring in and speak to us, the ability for us to be able to capture that as a response as well. We also will be running our verbal sessions here through various hui, and in particular going back to those iwi and hapu group who were involved in the original discussions around the formulation of the discussion document. And then just referring you to this new section here is what we're looking to get support from today, is that we would like to introduce and run a trial on operating a group session where members of the community can come in and actually spend some time with yourselves talking about the 7 objectives. So a community member might want to come in and only talk about one of those objectives, or they might want to come along for the whole session and make their way around responding and talking to all 7 of the objectives. I suppose that the proviso, I guess, with this format is that it still has to be a verifiable way of, we still have to have a verifiable way of receiving and capturing those responses. So we will still need to collect names and contacts of people who are responding, and we will still need a way of being able to capture their overall intent of what they are verbally speaking and responding to about. All of the information from all of these sources, all the written and all the verbal, still need to come back to you in an analysed form and presented to you as a decision-making document for you to be able to go through all of that responses collectively to make a final decision on the final spatial plan. And I think I might just leave it there, and if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer those off.
Thank you, Una. Una, has research suggested that with the activity now on social media that people are looking at different ways to present? Is that part of the rationale for, because we're moving away from those very formal hearings, obviously, is that part of the rationale?
Correct, yes it is, yep. I suppose it's breaking down some of those barriers and actually being, putting ourselves in the position of being seen as taking away that barrier of people being able to respond, so being receptive to receiving responses in a format that the person who is responding is comfortable in doing so.
Thank you. Councillor Kent.
Thank you, Madam Chair, through you. I have got major concerns about this, and the reason I have major concerns about this is because the consultation procedure is there for a purpose. That is to give the people the chance to consider and give their views to us. What you're proposing here is to hold workshops where we tell them what they should be thinking. And sorry, that's not consultation at all. The other issue that we have in holding workshops is the same people can attend multiple workshops and therefore their views can be counted multiple times, which is going to totally skew any sort of analysis that we try to do from the results. I personally believe that, sorry, if people aren't prepared to actually commit to an email or to a written submission, then sorry, if all they can do is tick a box like Facebook, then do we seriously need to actually take their views into consideration? Because they are not seriously considering what we're asking them.
Well, I don't think you can generalise that they're not seriously considering what we're asking of them. I think it's a bit of a generalisation. And all views are valuable, whether they're giving it as a tick or whether they're fronting or whether they're doing, attending a hui or a group session. So I think that's what we're trying to do, is to capture as many ways as possible of getting some input into our spatial plan. Now, Councillor Stewart.
Yeah, I just think this is great news. We did this with the redevelopment of Raukawa-Tait. We went out into the community hall, we had lunchtime, 3 lunchtimes and 2 evening meetings, where we engaged the community. The same people didn't come. we engaged the community, they had little slips of paper, and we gave them what they wanted. They put their notes down, it was collated, came back to council. Council said, no, the community wants this, 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 wants a footprint over here, wants this, that, and it happened. So my question is, I want this to go even further. I don't want them coming in here. I think we need to go out to the rural halls, the Kaharoas, the Waikiris, the Ngākurus, the Reparoas, and give them an opportunity so that we get a balanced view across the whole district. Not just the normal hardy angels who want to come in and push their own little barra. And the 7 objectives are quite clear, so it is confined in terms of what we're looking for. So I because as Councillor Hunt, the pop-up store we had for the CBD redevelopment and the opening up of the CBD was hugely successful. And in that it had whiteboard with little slips of paper and people could put in, I mean, it didn't matter how ridiculous it was. That was their view. And I think this is innovative. I think it's a great approach. And but I just ask that question, can we go out there as well as we can have some night sessions in here? But I also believe we need to get out there and communicate with the rural community, the lifestyle people, the lakes people, and get some considered feedback across the whole district.
Thank you. Una.
Yes, so what you were talking about there, Charles, will definitely be captured. Doesn't want to do it. Will definitely be captured in that second verbal box. So there are planned events to go out with the Rural and the Lakes Community Board around to various locations and run sessions like that. What we're proposing.
Will we be invited to be involved in
yes.
that?
Yep. What we're proposing in the sort of the group session one is to run more of like an expo where there will be potentially booths set up and some information on those objectives, but an elected member with, I guess, fronting each one of those objectives, a technical staff member there and effectively a scribe, and people can come in and actually give their response over in that setting. We're also proposing to have a bit of a video link booth in that session as well, where if they don't actually want to come in and talk to an elected member, they can come and have their response recorded via video.
They can't say hello to their mum or anything like that.
Won't be live streamed.
Okay.
Madam Chair, I think that the other addition, and it picks up on what Councillor Sturt had identified, is that when you get a group of people together, they often see perspectives that they may not have identified when they first sat down and thought about a submission. So, we've found that with the various meetings we've had in the rural area and in the community board area, Nongataha being an example, with some excellent discussions held around the maps and at that time, where people would raise issues and then others would say, no, I don't agree with that because of this, this and this, and actually they got into really good conversations almost independently of staff. So it actually helps people shape their own thinking and seeing the different perspectives. So you're right, and some of those previous engagements have been excellent, and that's what we're trying to solidify around both of those. First locational ones, and the second lot being almost thematic around the 7 objectives within the plan. It does build quite a neat set of conversations outside that more formal presentation of their submission to council in a traditional manner.
Councillor Hunt?
Thank you. I think this is a really good move. It's really moving away from bureaucracy. We've had a council-centred approach to hearings. We're actually moving towards a community-centred. In the same way that you might have a teacher-centred class or a student-centred learning environment, we're moving into the one where the community is the focus, not what's convenient for us. It's harder work for us because we don't just sit around here and wait for them to come in. We have to go out and actually hear what they want to say. And yes, the pop-up shops were a great example. Our 3 markets are another great opportunity. There's multiple places we can turn up and actually meet our community. And for me, the greatest strength is we won't just get the professional submitters, the habitual submitters, who find this environment suits them and it suits only a certain subgroup of people in our community. It doesn't suit those who aren't comfortable speaking publicly. It doesn't suit those who might struggle with a written document and then reading it out loud. It doesn't suit those who have to sit in front of what is quite a formidable group of civic leaders. So it's a bit like our phone survey. We're only capturing those with a landline. Our current submission process only captures a small and ageing population who are habituated to the submission process that we have set up because it suited us. Actually, I want to throw it out. I'm happy to toss the whole thing. This is a new way of relating to our community. Everything in the media, every way we relate and connect with each other has changed. It hasn't just changed a little. It's been a complete turn up and throw up. It's like 52 pickup. Everything is a different game. So we have great strength in doing this. We'll be leading again in an innovation that others will follow. And we won't get it all right, but that actually isn't the point. The point is we're willing to do something significantly different. And there's no basis to the submission and hearing process. It was habit and it suited us. So let's actually do something that suits and works for our community, and I hope that they'll embrace it wholeheartedly. And I know from the benefit of the many pop-up stores we had, from those that were one day to those that lasted 8 weeks, that we got community in those places, talking to other people in the community that they would never have met otherwise.
Because they were intimidated, they felt intimidated.
I celebrate our initiative, and I look forward to seeing the plan as it comes out, Una. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Gould?
What I'm concerned about is the verbal response on the 7th of December. The submissions close on the 17th of November. We've also got, with recommendation 1, a lot of policy changes for the 1st of December. We're going to get a lot of the key staff going to be involved with both submission process. So I think the verbal submission process will be better going out to the 14th of December, which will give the staff of the Rotorua-Tait Council more opportunity to respond to the submission process coming through.
Well, thank you very much, Councillor Gould, for being concerned and for raising that. And I'm sure we've got sitting here JP and Una, and I'm sure that'll be taken on board. So thank you for your concern in that area. Your Worship?
I think Councillor Hunt said it all. It's a new paradigm, a new way. We've now got the Rural and Lakes Board and Te Tato. So if we can't cover this as elected members to get out there in front of the public and own it, then I think we let our community down. So I really look forward to this.
Thank you, Your Worship. Councillor Donaldson?
Yeah, pretty much it's all been said, but I will be a support, I think, of all the plans that we're producing. This one is the most future-focused, and the point's already been made early in this meeting by Councillor Tapsall. Our engagement with youth is just sort of not there right now. And the point's well made in this report, that youth are a key interest group in this regard. They don't have a ratepayer lens on what council's about, and so from that perspective alone, it's vitally important that we enlarge the process in the scope of consultation. So I'll be supporting.
Mr. Thomas?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, I just have a few questions and a couple of comments to make. First comment is great to try something new. I'm all in favour of it, and I know staff knows that the Lakes Community Board has been trialling a very similar model all year on various issues. I'm assuming that these discussion groups are going to be similar to what the rural and community boards did with the initial discussion document, where so it's one meeting where all 7 objectives are present and people work around the groups. Is it going to be one discussion group, or are you going to have a number of them? Yeah. The other thing you're going to have councillors present. Are you expecting all councillors to be present for each group, or just 1 or 2 for each group? Or, I mean, what's the format you're seeing around that? I know when we went out with the community boards, basically all the community board representatives turned up to all the meetings that they could. But I'm not sure what you're envisaging the structure around that to be.
I think the Mayor probably summed that up nicely with probably an expectation that we'll see you all there at these events. I guess the proposal at the moment is that we're looking at aligning objectives with members, so not just councillors, so yourselves included, and yourselves included as well. I guess to be there and listen and respond to the objective that might align most with yourselves and your current areas of expertise and concerns and that type of stuff at the moment. Also, those objectives do align quite nicely with portfolio areas as well. So there is a good mix there of being able to sort of have the right people in the right booths, for want of a better word. And yes, it is envisioned that that session would be almost like I suppose, for want of a better word, a bit of a speed dating session. So times, and you can work the room. You can come along for maybe 10, 20 minutes if you just felt you wanted to come along and talk to someone about one particular objective, but if you wanted to stay and work the entire room and go and visit each of the 7 objectives, you will have the ability to do so.
Thank you.
Thank you. Could just a couple more questions.
Thank you.
And actually, I'll just make a comment here because I'm great to hear that response, because one thing I was going to comment on is that with our traditional form where we've had people come in to talk to us, and I'm thinking of both the experienced and the first timers who come in, and I'm actually thinking back to the gambling policy. Some of the strongest arguments I heard came from people who came before us, and I think that for me, in making decisions around that process, it was really, really important to hear those people. So I'm glad that you're envisaging all councils will hear this, councillors and members will hear these responses. I'm a little confused about whether this falls into the submission part or the consultation part of the spatial plan process, or the evaluation part of the process where SPNF or this group of people are evaluating what's been said.
So for clarification there, this is the consultation phase. So I want us to start getting away from using the word submission. It's a response. So we're looking for responses and we're looking for feedback and input, onto the draft spatial plan that we have out for consultation. When that closes and we've gone through all these bits of receiving responses and feedback, all of that information will have to be analysed. It will have to be presented to yourselves in such a way that comments, support, suggestions for change against each of those objectives is brought forward to you, and that is done in a decision-making process. Formerly, we would have called it a deliberations report, but we want to get away from that word too. And at this stage, that decision-making will happen after the Christmas and New Year period.
Yes, thank you, Una. We do tend to use language of our own, hearings and submission, and that just the language alone can be quite intimidating for some people. But when you think of the success we've had recently of our community engagement, and it has been successful, and I can tell you when you go to the communities and when they have their hui or their forums, you cannot dare to tell them what you want to place before them. It is their opportunity to tell us exactly. So really, there's a little bit of the reversal there, absolute, and it's high time. So it is really good to see this come before council. You had something, Councillor Stewart, was it? Thank you.
I just wanted to. I heard what you had said, which I thought was very valuable, but I want to make sure that there's a gap between hearing all the rank and file stuff and then going straight to a formal. I'd like us, as a team, including Te Tato and the community boards, to put it all on the table and say, what are we going to run with, or what changes it, rather than go straight from that to a formal decision-making process. I just throw that in there.
Is there a step there that you want Okay. Yeah, so we can, so obviously the collated information will come to us with, is that correct, or? Yeah.
What I'm understanding is that you would like some, I guess, consolidated opportunity to go through the feedback and the responses before making a decision. I'll just need to go back and check that from what point do we sort of click over to having lots of freedom to actually making sure that we're still in line with our special consultative procedure and our decision-making process.
Yes, because that's important, because we have to sit down then and discuss what has, what has come from the community.
Correct, and you will still do that. That will be your decision-making process, and that will be done at a council meeting. But what I think the request from Councillor Sturt was that he was looking at something before that. Yep, and I'll just need to seek some clarification over how and what we can do in that space.
Thank you very much. Yes, Councillor Hunt.
One thing to add just to what Mr Thomas said, I think we've lumped all our hearings together, and when we're doing policy, RMA, dog hearings, DLC, they all need a format and a formal format. But what we've tended to do is formalise everything. And so I completely agree. It's vitally important when in those for those aspects that we do have people come in and it is a formalised environment. But I think equally it's vitally important that we don't have one size that fits all. So I just wanted to clarify that it wasn't throwing all those hearings and submissions out. There is an appropriate place for those.
Thank you. I'm going to put that. Do you want to say something? Add something?
Madam Chair, I think the key for us in delaying the decision making until February of next year was because with so many sort of meetings and the need to capture the feedback from those meetings and then make sure we're in a position to give you a nice summary of it, whether you've been able to attend all the meetings or only some of the meetings, there will be a lot of information we'll be capturing from those different meetings. So we'll need to get all of that together, and I think Councillor Sturt's request is probably valid in that discussion, because there will be a huge amount that we then have to put forward into a decision-making process. So we just need to make sure we can structure that. So that's part of us learning and making sure we can capture all of that information and present it to you in a way that sort of glues it all together.
Thank you very much, JP. Could I please have a mover and it's been moved by Councillor Sturt, seconded by Councillor Hunt, that the committee recommends to Council to support the introduction and trial of a new hearings process for the spatial plan special consultative procedure. It's been moved and seconded. I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary? Thank you. Carried. Now our last item in general recommendation 6, page 74 in our report. Oh, this is a pretty straightforward one, but I'll just... so could I have a mover and a seconder, please, to receive the report, 2017 New Zealand-China Mayoral Forum, business case for conference attendance be received. Thank you, Councillor Gould. Thank you, Mrs. Trumper. So thank you. Good morning, Craig. Thank you.
Kia ora koutou. As Chair has said, it's a pretty straightforward report. I think if we go back, councillors will remember we now have a policy that when there's ever attendance at a conference, there needs to be approval in a business case. So in this case, there's been an invitation to council for the Mayor to take part in a mayoral forum with China, and that is to lead a delegation from Rotorua. So in conjunction with RED, we are working through how to actually make that happen. So this paper just outlines where we've gotten to with that. So I'll take it as read, and if you, Destination Rotorua, yeah.
Thank you.
So the CCO, sorry, Charles. Yeah, so we're working in partnership with them. Essentially, we're paying the Mayor's bills and they're paying their bills. So.
Thank you. Councillor Kent?
Thank you. Just through you, Madam Chair. Can you just clarify how the Mayor intends to travel by air to China and back for $300?
It's in Wellington.
Yeah. Sorry.
I'd go with her if that cost.
It's been a long day.
Yeah. Sorry.
I'd go with her if that cost.
Yeah. So the first forum was held in. Yeah, so the first forum was held in China, I think, in 2015, but
That's
Mayor
right.
Chadwick didn't attend that one. So this is the reciprocal one into New Zealand, where the Mayor will sort of speak and talk to Chinese mayors who will be visiting. Yeah.
Thank you. Was the Councillor Gould?
Chair, I'd like to just point out some dates. I know the conference in Wellington is on the 3rd and 4th of December, but we've also got the Mud Festival in Rotorua on the 1st, 2nd and 3rd of December.
Yes.
And we've also on the 5th of December, we've got the Chamber of Commerce function at Council here in the evening. So I take it that to worship the Mayor will be back for the 5th of December. And that she will open the Mud Festival on the 1st of December and somebody else will close it on the 3rd.
Councillor Gould, look, thank you for your concern, but the Mayor certainly operates her own schedule, and I'm sure she's aware of that. And Your Worship, would you like to respond to that?
Respond, actually. Of course I manage my time. I'll be there to open. I don't intend to be at the festival for 3 days. That's not required at all. I'll be there to open. I'm particularly thrilled that I'll be speaking at this forum in Wellington on tourism. I think that's of huge significance for Rotorua, and the other aspect that we've got a growing participation in economic development in Rotorua, and was noted that there were 3 tables at the Chamber of the Westpac Business Excellence Awards on Saturday night. There were 3 tables of our Chinese community of commerce there, and I think it's all said here. And yes, I really enjoy attending. I think the other aspect here, if you look at the cities that are coming over, Guangzhou is coming, and there's huge representation. So if you get a voice there, it was better than going on a mayoral delegation to China. It was actually more significant to be part of this forum in Wellington. So I think it's great that we've got a presence there, and I look forward to going with others that will be speaking about Rotorua and our strategic direction. And if you note that the forum is about sustainable economies, balancing economic development with the environment, we couldn't be better placed to speak there with our sustainability and our diverse economy.
Thank you, Your Worship. Councillor Maxwell?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. No, the benefits of having our Mayor and this delegation going down a rated high for me, and also our Mayor being one of the key group of 15 and having a speaking slot there, I think is very important. No, I wholeheartedly support the recommendation.
Thank you. Yes, Councillor. Oh, sorry, Mr. Berryman, Kemp?
Did not have a question, but supports it.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Councillor Donaldson and then Councillor Stewart, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Look, I think, as Councillor Maxwell said, this is an important opportunity that should not be missed for Rotorua. Further to what Her Worship has said, half the room at the Westpac economic update this week by their senior economist was our Chinese community of commerce. So we have some important links, and so look, I'd be happy to move part 2 of the recommendation.
Oh, thank you very much. And Councillor Kent is seconding that. Thank you very much. Councillor Stewart, then Mr. Thomas.
In favour of the recommendation. I think it's a huge honour for not only Rotorua but also Her Worship the Mayor as a keynote speaker. It's obviously a high calibre conference. I note for $3,000 we're getting, and I hope the media pick this up, the Mayor and up to 5 additional delegates for the $3,000. So I hope there's an opportunity for representatives from our CCO in economic development, maybe a member from our Chinese Chamber of Commerce, member of the Chamber of Commerce, selected by the Mayor to join her as part of the Rotorua delegation. I think that we should have a strong presence there, and for $3,000 plus GST, I think it's a great investment, and I wish the Mayor, if you need a valet, I'm available, but I wish the Mayor all the best.
Mr Thomas?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, I feel a little bit for the Mayor that this actually has to come before the committee for such a small amount of money. I mean, if it was $10,000, $20,000 to go to China, but when these things have to come up for a conference in Wellington, I see under $1,000 for the Mayor's travel and accommodation, perhaps we could look at this policy at some stage to have a lower cap where we could just be informed that it's happening and be reassured that they've got the best deals they could, rather than having to bank such small amounts of money.
Yeah, I do agree with that. Craig, Craig, thank you.
Yeah, it's actually quite a bit of work to put a paper together for something like this, and Debbie's done very well. I was just going to go back to what Charles said about making sure we got the right people. So some representatives of the CCO and Andrew Wilson and Sean up in our strategy team are working on the appropriate people to best represent Rotorua in this space with Steve. So they'll work through that, and the Mayor will have a say in how that works out. So what you're talking about will definitely be the process between now and then.
Thank you very much. Actually, I have to say, Your Worship, that I love it when you go and present anywhere because you do it the Rotorua way. We always have a mihi to the assembled group and it's just so wonderful, and we tend to be the only ones that do it. So that's our point of difference, and as it should be. So thank you very much. Now, I'll put that, it's been moved, oh, yes it was. Yes it was, Councillor Kent. I think Councillor Donaldson moved and was seconded by Councillor Kent. That the committee recommend that Council approves conference costs, flights and accommodation for the Mayor to lead a delegation to Wellington to attend the 2017 New Zealand-China Mayoral Forum. All those in favour, I'll put that, all those in favour please say aye. Contrary, thank you. Now, the resolution to exclude the public, I don't really think that's necessary because there's just the minutes, and if there's going to be nothing, no discussion, I can just put the minutes to you, and then thank you very much. Councillor Kent has moved that that the confidential minutes of the Strategy, Policy and Finance Committee extraordinary meeting held on the 14th of September 2017 be adopted as true and correct. There's a seconder required. Thank you, Councillor Tapsell. So I'll put that motion. All those in favour please say aye. Thank you. Carried. Now I'll call... Oh, sorry.
Sorry, Madam Chair, just before the meeting ends, there was just one small thing that I just wanted to say.
Oh, yes, this is in an open forum, is that correct? Yeah, that's what you... Thank you, yes. Yes, please.
Apologies, I should have raised this at the start in terms of general business. So just as an observation, I wanted to congratulate whoever it was. It was particularly refreshing to see out the front of the council building the construction safety fence signage is bilingual. And that for me really starts